Hello, we are live. Yeah, I've been trying to go live for the past few days. Um, Certain things haven't worked out, but here I am. Uh, yeah, so tonight, this evening, however you want to put it, it's about 5:45 here. Um, what we're going to try to do is get a few atheists on, and I want because I keep getting comments that are absolutely insane, right? um, that atheists are coming on there and saying, well, what is objective and subjective morality, right? Like, what is that? Um, and then one of them was actually like, uh, hey, I would love your response. Like, can you tell me this and that and the other? It's like, you know, I've already made a video on it. I'm already, doing all kinds of other stuff. So, um, yeah, it's crazy the way atheists like to um, twist and change things, um, because they cannot come to grips with the truth, which they think is subjective anyhow. Um, and I'm looking up something real quick. Yeah, I mean, like some people have actually came on and like commented on some of my posts and videos, and they're like, what is the actual meaning between wrong and right? I mean, look, if we actually have to get down to the actual wording of right and wrong just for you to justify um, what's going on in your head, I'm like, come on, really? Let's go. I mean, honestly, it's just crazy to me. I mean, it really is. I mean, obviously, I'm not I don't know why that was like that. I'm not an atheist, so I don't understand, because you have to redefine so many things in order to, I guess, come to your conclusion. I'm like, come on, really? Like, if you can't even give me the if you don't know the difference between, like, the definitions between right and wrong, then there's something wrong. Okay, and that's objective. Okay, that's objectively saying that there's something wrong. What's going on? Thank you for joining the stream. We're going to get to, hopefully we're going to get to a few things here tonight. And hopefully we can jump to some conclusions. But real quick, what I would like to do is I want to look up a few things here, which I think will be helpful, hopefully. Maybe not to the atheist, because again, they're stuck in their ways and everything. But maybe to the ones that are kind of undecisive, or even the Christians that are trying to find a way to combat, to go against these things. And so I'm just going to share this. And this is just a simple Google search, right? Like, it doesn't take much. Okay. So look at this, right? All right. This is objective morality definition. Okay. It's just a simple Google search. Okay. Objective morality. If y'all can see that, hopefully. Okay. So the idea that certain actions or and beliefs are universally, which means everybody, all right, universally right or wrong, regardless of individual opinions, okay, cultural beliefs, or personal feelings. Okay. So what is objectivity? What is objective morality? Okay. And to get an objective morality, you cannot have personal feelings, you cannot have cultural benefit or beliefs, and you cannot have individual opinions to have objective morality. Okay. Now, what is subjective morality? Subjective morality is just the opposite. Okay. All right. Subjective morality is the idea that moral judgments are based on personal feelings, opinions, or beliefs, and therefore can vary between individuals and cultures. See how they're total opposites? Total opposites, okay? Objective morality means that it's universal, okay? It's unchanging, right? And it does not matter your opinion, your feelings, or your beliefs. It doesn't matter. None of that matters, okay? What matters is that this is objective, okay? That's what matters, all right? And this comes from individual belief, okay? Now understand this, okay? Individual belief, okay? This has nothing to do with the creative God and what we believe that the creative God says, okay? Because Christians agree on what God says, okay? Now, can that vary between, some people think differently about God's moral law, right? Some Christians are like, yeah, he said that back then, but it's not really relative today, which I can question, I can question them and see, kind of rack their brain and say, what exactly are you talking about here? But like, how do you come to that conclusion, right? Because we're all trying to get to, well, us Christians are all trying to get to truth, right? To objective truth. All right. Atheists don't care about objective truth. Okay. They just don't. They don't care about getting to truth. They don't care about finding out the real meaning of anything because they don't believe in that. They don't care for that. And so, to my conclusion, and again, hopefully we can get some people on here that has a differing view. Hopefully we can get some agnostics here. Hopefully we can get mainly atheists, right? Gnostic, I don't even understand how you can call yourself a Gnostic atheist. That doesn't make sense, right? So that there's some atheists that'll come on and say, yeah, I'm Gnostic atheist. What? Those are two different things, totally different things. You cannot have one with the other. Okay. That's contradictory. Honestly, if you have, if you're an atheist or agnostic, okay, atheist means there is no God. You've already came to the conclusion there is no God. Okay. That's what that comes along with. Okay. That's what an atheist is. You look at all the the four horsemen of the new atheists, right? They'll say that. Okay. They're not like all these newcomers, right? That's like, oh, well, we just don't know. And the lack of belief is not a real belief and everything else. That's not true. It's just simply not true. And I know truth is subjective to atheists, but that's what we're trying to discover today. Okay. So agnostic means that you don't know and you're willing to try, or you're willing to get to a certain point. Okay. A certain belief system. You're trying to get to that. So you're kind of teetering between theist and atheist. That's what an agnostic is. So you cannot say that there is no God and then I don't know at the same time. That doesn't make sense. Okay. That doesn't make sense. Like, just as much as me as a Christian saying, well, I'm a Christian agnostic. What are we even saying at this point? That don't even make sense. How can you be a Christian and be an agnostic at the same time? That's ludicrous. That doesn't even make sense. So in the same way, when you're on the other opposite side of the spectrum completely, okay, Christians believe that there's a God, one God, okay? Atheists believe that there is no God, okay? No higher power to answer to, nothing, okay? But agnostic is between the two. And agnostic is wanting to get to either one, okay? So if you're not able to actually comment right now, it's because you got to be subscribed to do so. But you don't have to be subscribed to come on the channel. Okay. So I'm going to drop the link and let's get something going here. Let's get some discussions. All right. And I'm only allowing one at a time. Okay. And again, I'm going to say just like I did before. Okay. No scoffing. There is no scoffing. Okay. No, man, I just started. Thank you for showing up. That's great. No, I just started. So let's get some. I mean, I'm welcoming one atheist and one Christian at a time. Okay. You could be agnostic, right? So if we get one atheist, one agnostic, and one Christian on, let's do it. But they cannot be two Christians. Well, I'm always the one. This is my channel, right? So obviously it's going to be, you can have two of the Christian side. Okay. But you can only have one atheist. All right. Or one agnostic or anything else. Right. So if y'all want to come on, let's jump on, let's get something going. Cause what I'm asserting here. Okay. And again, no scoffing. All right. No bad attitudes, none of that. So, and I think that most atheists that I've talked to on this channel have held themselves in like a fantastic way, right? Like they're very respectful. They have their ideas and all that stuff. So I applaud the atheists that has come on so far. The ones in the comment section, however, they're not so great. Okay. Because, normally when you get a face-to-face or a one-on-one conversation, you tend to get more, humble, right? On both sides. Okay. Because I can get on here, not saying I will, but I can get on here and say anything I want to. The atheists can do the same thing. But when you get together and you start talking, then you start really like humbling up and both sides, right? And I've found that to be true. Okay. When you're in the comment section, it's a completely different thing. Okay. So we got Brett. What's going on, man?
What's going on?
Did I say that right? Brett?
Yep. You got
it. Cool. Was you on Teach Yahweh's channel the other day?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, cool. So all right, man. So what you got in mind?
Oh man, I don't even know. I was just gonna go follow your flow. Did you have like claims that you were wanting to discuss?
Yeah. So the main topic here is if you have no God, then you have no morality, objectively. That's what I'm stating. So without a God, you cannot objectively have morality. And real quick, I like what you did there. That's a great idea. On your name, look, anybody who comes on this stream, that would be great if you actually labeled. If you have a label of yourself, if you're an agnostic, if you're Christian, if you're atheist, or anything, if there is anything in between, just label it there. If you're just not sure, then that's okay. You don't really have to put it on there. But I would like it if you did. That way we can get some, we don't have to just, keep asking, questions to get, the belief system. Because honestly, if you're a Christian, our beliefs, agnostic, we know the beliefs, and so on. So, so that's my claim. Do you have anything to come against that?
And just to make sure I understand, so you feel that the Christian God is the benchmark for what moral behavior is?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And so anything he does is an absolute and objectively morally good.
Yes, and that's actually where and in my worldview, I think that Yahweh, right? I believe that he is he creates morality, okay, and he also lives it out. So everything that he does is completely moral. Okay. Some things I can't explain because it's out of my reach, but I can say that, we can come to a conclusion that certain things that happen in the Word, in the Bible, we can actually come to a conclusion that certain things that God did in the Bible, rather it be, the so-called slavery thing. We've talked about that's what we were talking about in Yahweh's Teach Yahweh stream, or like the genocide stuff. Either way, like there's certain things in the Bible that we can look at culturally, and we can say, okay, well, God was working in this certain way in this time, so it actually goes with his morality that he has set up.
Gotcha. And then, so something that's objectively moral, it means it's moral for everybody, and it's moral objectively good yesterday, today, and tomorrow, right? It's unchanging.
Yes.
Okay. So, I guess I'll give you an example of where, so let's say God prescribes the law, and that law is what's objectively and morally good, and then he violates that law. He literally does the opposite of that law. Would that indicate that his actions are then immoral?
Yeah. So if God said a certain thing in his law and then he did the complete opposite, then that would be, that's my stance on it. That's what I believe, that again, if God issued a law and then goes against his law in any sort, then that would make him immoral.
Objective. Okay. So can I give you an example where he does that?
Yeah, I probably already heard it on the other channel.
Yeah, you probably have, but so we'll start off at Deuteronomy 24:16.
All right, hang on. Let me get that up. I'm pulling up the app now. Let me see. All right. I guess that's the only screen. Okay. All right. So you said Deuteronomy. Which one?
24:16.
24 and 16. All right.
And I can read it. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin.
Okay.
Okay. And then if we jump over to 2 Samuel 12.
All right.
We've got this, the situation is David has slept with Bathsheba. He's impregnated her, so obviously he's committed adultery, which is a violation of one of the 10 Commandments. I think it's like the 7th. And then to try to cover up the pregnancy and the adultery, he tries to first get Uriah to sleep with her so that he can maybe cover it up and seem like it's his kid, but he doesn't sleep with her. So then David sends Uriah to the front lines to be killed. He's trying to get him killed. And the interesting thing about that situation is the Bible identifies that as David murdering Uriah, right?
Sure.
So now David's committed, per the Bible, he's committed murder. So that's 2 violations of the 10 Commandments right there. And both of those violations carry the penalty of death, right? Mm-hmm. And so when it comes time for David to be punished, David doesn't receive the punishment. His baby that was just born is made sick. And it says literally God made the baby sick, and the baby died after being made sick. So God didn't just snap his fingers and take the baby's life or anything. The baby became sick, indicating there was kind of a suffering death. And then not only that, David's wives are then raped by his son. And again, the whole situation of his wives being taken is something that God is causing to happen. He says, "I will cause this to happen to you." So the wives bear the punishment of David, and the baby bears the punishment of David, but David doesn't bear any punishment.
Okay, so on the child dying, okay, this is not the same thing as what Deuteronomy says, where the father or the child will not die, or what was it? They commit sin because of the father, that all die for their own sin. So
Right, yeah, the
that,
child shall not be put to death for the father's sin.
yeah. So the thing that we got to get to, and we got to kind of ruffle through the smoke here, okay, is that when you look at the Bible, okay, if we're going to critique the Bible, we must do it in the Bible's terms. Okay, would you agree with that?
Well, so as an agnostic, I'm saying that we need to respect what the text plainly says,
Yeah,
and
sure.
of course the context. So I don't feel that it's adequate or appropriate to add in extra biblical
Well, I'm not
details.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. So what I'm saying is that the Bible deals with physical and spiritual. Okay, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say there's physical and spiritual.
Okay, so not everything's physical in the Bible sense. Okay, so when and that's what I mean by, in order to interpret the Bible, you must go within its terms. Okay, and I understand that certain belief systems would not allow certain persons to not look into the spiritual realm on certain things. Okay, so in Deuteronomy, what he's saying here, okay, is that he's talking about spiritual death, not just. And I'm saying he's talking about physical death as well, but he's also talking about spiritual as well, because he mentions sin. Okay, and as we can look into the New Testament, when we die to our sin, right, we die as slaves to sin, and then we rise and reign with Christ. So there's a spiritual side to the death and resurrection of a person's life, right? And so whenever it's talking about in Deuteronomy, that's not necessarily just physical death. Okay, so we gotta understand these things. Okay, however, when it comes to David's child dying, okay, that is not. See, this is what happens when you cherry pick scripture and you try to pinpoint it and really like. I'm not saying you're doing this on purpose, but I'm saying that this can lead to that. Okay, so right here it says in 2 Samuel 12, okay, 15, it says, then Nathan went to his house, and the Lord afflicted the child. Okay, so the Lord afflicted the child that Uriah's wife bore, okay, to David, and he became sick. Okay, so we don't know what the extent of this is. All right, so this is not the baby inheriting or dying because of the sins of David.
So
Okay,
can I
yeah.
just, if you start at 13, that'll clarify things. 2 Samuel 12:13.
Okay. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Yes. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die. Okay. Because there's a greater purpose to what David had to offer. Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned. Sorry, I can't. Scorn the Lord, the child who is born to you shall die. Okay. So
Could I just for the audience, just read it from the NASB, because it flows a little bit more clearly. So 2 Samuel 12:13 says, then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord also has allowed your sin to pass. You shall not die. However, since by this deed you have shown utter disrespect for the Lord, the child himself who is born to you shall certainly die. So right there, it's saying that David's child is going to now die for David's sins.
right. So again, we must look into the spiritual side of this as well. Okay. So the point here is that in somebody's physical eyes, right, to our naked eye, we can see this and we can say, okay, so this is pretty awful, right? Because God afflicted the child, made the child sick, okay, because David did this certain act, okay? But you also got to think about it this way, okay? The child is going to everlasting eternity with God. So it's
Right,
not like,
we're not.
like child suffering in any kind of way because, might be sick. But again, we don't know what the sickness is.
Right, but we're kind of getting off the topic of Deuteronomy 24:16 says that a child shall not be put to death for the sins of the father. That's a law in Deuteronomy 24:16.
Yeah.
And over here in 2 Samuel 12, we have an explicit example of David's child being put to death for his sins.
Yeah. So
And
again,
and David not being, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. David not being punished for his sins.
Yeah. So again, all right. So again, we're not getting off topic. I'm literally reading what's going on here. So, see right here, I just got this comment here. So he doesn't get a chance at life then. Okay. So I'm not even going to mention anything like, abortion or anything like that. We're not even getting into that, but just something to think about. Okay. To JoJo here. Okay. Now we can get you on in just a little bit if you need to, but right here, you see, again, this is not the same thing. Okay. And here's why, because yes, David sinned, and yes, the child is being taken away. All right. But the child is not being punished. That's the point of it. Okay. Because when it comes to death, all right. So in God's law, if somebody commits a sin, they die. Okay. So that's the thing. But however, when it comes to the baby here, the baby don't have any kind of life yet, right? It's a child. It's a baby, right? Just was born. You know what I'm saying? So it doesn't have, it's not like God is literally punishing this child because of David's sin, okay? Because again, the baby is going to everlasting eternity with the Father. All right, so he's going to heaven. So again, if you go into the context of what the Bible's stating, this is not the same thing.
Well, so you're saying that because the baby got a one-way ticket or a early ticket to heaven, that somehow the baby didn't just die for the father's sins, and that's what I'm saying about what we're kind of getting off topic is because we're talking about the topic of God has made a law that a baby shall not die for the sins of the father, but then we have a situation where a baby is literally dying for the sins of the father. So that, like I said in the beginning, if God violates his own laws by killing a baby, right, for the sins of the father, then that's a violation of his own law, and that's kind of
where's that Deuteronomy passage again?
Deuteronomy 24:16.
24:16. Okay, I figured it was 24. All right, so fathers shall not be put to death because of their children. Okay, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers. Okay, each one shall be put to death for his own sin. Okay, so again,
what sins did the baby do?
Well, but that's what I'm saying. It's a baby. All right, and the punishment, all right, is that it's being taken away. So it's almost like God is taking away the gift, okay, of the baby, right, to David. So that's in a way punishing David. Okay, but David had a higher purpose in God's eyes. All right, so I'm not saying that's any kind of, just because God had a certain plan for David that David was going to, get off scot-free. No, he got punished for it. But here's the thing: the baby didn't.
but you would feel that that's justice in your eyes. So let's just say you have it
Because I take the entirety of the word and what it says. Okay. And so
right.
whenever I take what it says that babies, right, when they don't have any kind of sin, right? They don't do anything. Okay. They have not earned their way, or they haven't consciously, they're not consciously able to make that decision to be born again. Okay, so they get a one-way ticket to heaven. Absolutely. But here's the thing. That's exactly why I say that instead of now here's what I don't understand, and I'm going to ask you this. All right. I don't know where you stand on this, but I have heard certain people, they would say that certain people would say, oh, I don't want to have children and bring them into the screwed up world. All right. Would you be among those people?
No, I have kids, but can I just want to ask one question on the justice part, because again, this goes back to whatever God does is objectively and morally good, and that
Mm-hmm.
is the standard of justice and morality. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be like saying that you just went and you did the same thing, right? You went and cheated on your wife, and you got her pregnant, and then you went and then you killed the husband of the girl that you cheated on, right? So then your local police come and they arrest you and they take you into court and everything. The judge goes, I think there's some good things for you. So instead of you taking the punishment, I'm going to go ahead and take your infant daughter and I'm going to make her pay your punishment, right?
Yeah.
Would that be justice?
Well, no, because that's not an eternal God that can give that eternity, eternal glory to that child. So what I'm saying here is that God chose to not necessarily make the baby suffer. Okay. Now, when it says that God afflicted the baby with sickness, okay, again, we don't know what the sickness is. Okay. So if it said like, God put smallpox on the baby or leprosy on the baby, then I'd be like, and I don't understand that. But again, like sickness, right? Could be like instant, you know what I mean? Like it doesn't necessarily have to be a long punished,
Yeah. Well,
crazy
can
thing.
I just read what scripture says then real quick? It says,
Yeah.
the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and it became very ill. David therefore pleaded with God for the child. David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. The elders of his house stood beside him, urging him to rise from the ground, but he would not, nor did he eat food with them. On the seventh day, the child died, and the servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, while the child was still alive, we spoke to him, and he did not listen to us. How can we tell him that the child is dead? So even David is lamenting this baby who's sick and dying,
And
right?
that
For
was the
his
punishment
sins.
that was the punishment for his sins. All right,
Right,
because
but
baby's
he
not
didn't
punished, but David is.
but he didn't that David needed to die for his sins, not the baby.
Right,
That's the law, is
because
that the father should die for his own sins, not the baby dying for his father's
yeah,
sins.
but here's the thing though. All right. So David lamented. Okay. David went to God. Okay. David repented of what he had to do, of what he did. Okay. So again, there's forgiveness there. All right. So that's not the same thing. Okay. Because when you commit an act, okay, and you are put to death, that is without repentance. There is no forgiveness, no nothing for that, because you was able to do that. Okay. You literally with your own heart did an act and was unrepented for it. Okay. And so God did not, would not forgive that person. And again, I think we're misunderstanding the point here, because just because God made the baby sick, that does not necessarily mean that the baby suffered. And also, the baby had eternal glory with the Father. So I'm telling you, just like what Romans says, okay, just what Paul says in Romans 8, right? He says that the suffering of this current age, okay, of this current time, present time, cannot even compare to the future glory that we have. So again, in an agnostic mindset or an atheistic mindset, okay, we can't understand, or y'all can't understand exactly what that glory entails. Okay, that is the greatest thing. I would much rather go there now than stay here. Okay, so what I'm saying is, like, there's a greater purpose, okay, greater thing when the baby is taken up to heaven with the Father for all eternity. Okay, so again, I don't understand how that's such a bad thing.
You don't understand how it's a.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, so I just want to address one thing though, because you're saying that the baby was given an early ticket. That's the same thing for abortion, right? If somebody, and I'm not pro-abortion, right? But I'm saying that somebody who aborts a baby, that baby goes straight to heaven, right? Somebody who murders a child, that child goes straight to heaven. So it doesn't matter who's doing the killing. I think you and I both agree that the baby is going to go to heaven, right?
Okay.
But the issue here isn't, that now because God has taken the baby, that now he gets to go to heaven, so that's a good thing. The issue is that there's a law, and then not only is
Yeah.
that law stated
Right.
in Deuteronomy 24:16, Ezekiel 18:20 says, "The soul who sins shall die. The
Yeah.
son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son."
Right.
So that son suffered for the iniquity of the father,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that soul had committed no sin.
Right. So that's the thing, though. But like, babies can't. That child could not have, done its own sinful thing, right? So again, it was so early in that child's life, okay, that it wouldn't matter, because didn't necessarily have a life to call back to,
Right, but that's the
into.
same argument that abortionists make, that it's just cells,
No. But here's the thing, though. You're literally taking. See, that's a different kind of thing, because when an abortion, it's the mother and the father and the doctor and everybody that's involved. Okay, if you're with the murdering of this child, you are, like, you're the murderer. Okay, like, you're doing this murder because you're consenting to it. Okay, but again, this is not the same thing. God literally took the baby up with him. Okay,
but what makes that murder when they do it, but not murder when God does it?
because God didn't murder the child. God took the child.
Right, and they sent the child. So if they send the child to heaven early, and it's a good thing that the child is now going to heaven early, then it's
But it's
a bad
still
thing.
on them for murdering that child. So God didn't murder the child, but they literally. I'm not going into the graphics of it, because again, you're not pro-abortion, so I praise God for that. But I'm not going into it. But everybody knows the graphics, okay, of abortion. It's horrific. So that's not at all the same thing. So again, there was no suffering involved. Okay, and if there was, it's not accounted to. It's not recorded. Okay, it says that the baby became sick. That has nothing to do with anything. That doesn't say that the baby suffered or not. Okay,
Well,
so
it says that the baby became sick and then died 7 days later. So if a baby's born and they make the baby sick and then the baby dies, then it's okay, because that's exactly what God did. And if we can do what God can do, because that's the moral and just standard, then that should be an acceptable form.
that's not. But we can't. Okay. Again, abortion and this is completely different because of the things that I've already said. Okay, I've already stated. Okay, the people that have consented to it and is doing this horrific act to this baby that's still in the womb, that is a baby. Okay, that's horrific. Okay, that's literally taking a child. Okay, that is murdering a child. Okay, but what God did was basically take it back up to him. That's all it was.
Right. So let's just give a hypothetical scenario though.
For the I know what the point is. Okay, that the father or the son or the child will not die for the father's sin, right? And again, it's not the same thing, because, like, let's say
Well, I would say it's because the baby was not, old enough to make its own decisions or anything like that. So it was so early that it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to take this back because I'm not going to give you the blessing out of this unholy alliance that you did yourself. Okay. So the baby would have inherited the out of that unholy alliance. Okay. That was not instructed by God. God did not tell David to do anything like that. And I'm not having to explain that or reject to that. But again, it's not the same thing because the baby would have inherited the wrong of what David did. Okay. Not by God, but just by life itself. Okay. Because that would not have been very good, right? That child would have been and again, culture. Okay. That baby would have been treated as a bastard. Okay. So that was a totally different thing back then. And God was just being like, okay, I'm not going to have this happen here. So I'm just going to take the baby away from you.
Well, I mean, sons from multiple wives wasn't a bad thing.
Well,
I mean, they weren't treated. I mean, they were still royalty.
What do you mean? Are you talking about like they wouldn't have been treated in that kind of way, right? Like as bastards.
Right. Yeah. Like so David, Solomon, for example, Solomon had who knows how many children from over 700 wives. Those children were still considered royalty, and they were still, you know what I mean. They weren't like they still inherited things and all that kind of stuff. But I just because going back to what I asked you in the beginning of God's actions are the benchmark for what justice is and what morality is, right? So therefore, if we implement those actions and those things, then it should also be just. So if I have an affair with somebody, right, and that woman gets pregnant, and I go, you know what, this baby is a bastard child. I've cheated on my wife, and I've produced this child. So now go ahead and have the baby, and we're going to make it sick and send it back, right? Mm. That would be immoral by our standards, but because God does it, it becomes this rules for thee, but not for me. So then now we're starting to say God doesn't have to abide by the same rules.
No, but again, as I've already stated, it's not the same thing because we can't just take a baby back. We can't just send a baby back to heaven. We would have to physically harm the child to be able to do so.
Okay? Right, but God had to physically harm the child by making it sick.
No, but again, God did not go down there and pull the child limb from limb like we do. Okay.
Right. I'm not giving the scenario that he did. I'm saying that. So if we make it sick, if we don't pull it from limb to limb, it's postpartum. The baby is out of the womb, and we make it sick and send it back. Then is that then okay?
So again, it wouldn't be the same thing because again, we don't know what type of sickness this was. We don't know if there was suffering involved or anything else. So what we have to say is, okay, the things that we're not quite sure of, okay, we cannot impose on the text and say, well, this was incredibly wrong because you don't know every detail to it.
Yeah, and I'll agree with you. I don't want to add to the text and say that the baby suffered because it definitely doesn't say that. But what it does say and what is plainly stated in the text is that the law is the child shall not die for the sins of the father, and then we have David's baby literally dying for his sins.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing, though. Again, in this context, it would be more like, okay, if the father and the son, right, was standing there together, okay, and the father murdered somebody, okay, and then the son just sat there and watched, right, but then they came and actually stoned the son for it, and the father got away scot-free. That would be different. Because that would be like, okay, you're literally bearing false witness against this child, or against not against the child, but against the son or the child, the person. It says children, but
So you're saying, yeah. So what I hear you saying is that it's okay for God to make the child pay for the sins of the father, but another human cannot make the child pay for the sins of the father.
No, but again, that's not the same thing, and I can keep repeating it, but it's not the same. When God just takes back a child, a born child, right, takes back, okay, and as we can tell in the text, right, it does say 7 days, right?
Well, he suffered for 7 days. Or I'm sorry, it took 7 days from the time of being sick to the time of death.
Okay, so
7 days.
we know we don't
We
necessarily
don't know. We don't know how old the child is. At this point,
yeah, but we can say that the child was pretty early, right? Like it was,
well, I don't want to add to the text.
well, I'm not adding to the text, but what you can see is that, you know, pretty much directly after the birth.
There's no verbiage that supports directly after the birth. It just says the child.
Yes, I know, but it was after the fact that the child was born. Is what I'm
But
saying.
I don't.
We
Right, but
can't-
there's no text that
that
supports
said-
how long after.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying. However, it was pretty recent. Okay. So that's all I'm saying. We don't know how long. Okay. But we know that it wasn't like, okay, the baby is now a full grown male, right? That God just went ahead and took. Now we know it was pretty recent. We know it was pretty early. We know that for, you know, because the text is not necessarily specific on the dating and the age of the child. But we know because of the events that followed that it was pretty early. But
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm agreeing. We definitely know it's still a baby.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying we don't know that it's like 2 weeks after birth or 3 weeks after birth. It could have been 6 months after birth. You know, I mean, and that's
right. But I mean, honestly, it doesn't necessarily matter in this context, because I would say that this right here would be like the Deuteronomy 24:16. Okay. This would be more like that kind of scenario where, you know, the father literally, you know, murders somebody, and it's basically dealing with false witness, right? Is basically what we're talking about. So that would be my answer to this law. Okay. But again, if we can go into what happened in 2 Samuel, that stuff still stands. That in my view, in my head, that stuff still stands, because it would not necessarily be murder. It would be the taking of the child back to the father. That's where I would land with that. You can land anywhere you please to land, but that's where I would land.
Yeah. No, and that's, I mean, it's a kind of a good segue into the next one, the next point that I can bring up. So we agree that murder is taking the life of somebody who is innocent and undeserving, right?
Sure.
So, okay, so, and of course, Exodus 20:13, thou shalt not kill, which I think we agree that kill is more along the lines of murder.
Right.
And so then the violation of that law would be, and actually, before I make sure I'm not going to put my foot in my mouth here.
Yeah, but this is pretty hard. These are hard texts to deal with. I will I will agree with that. It's hard text to follow, but I think once you get down to you know, understanding what happened with the culture and what happens with, you know, like again, when God literally just takes a baby from the parents, right? That's not necessarily murder. That's not like, okay, I'm about to cut your head off. You know what I mean? Like it's, so
yeah.
I would say it's different than that.
Well, so in the next example I'm going to give, we have what I interpret as God commanding murder. So God is commanding Samuel, if I remember right, let me get to the verse real quick. God is commanding Samuel to go genocide the Amalekites. Okay? And the Amalekites who are living at that time do not have anything to do with the transgression that has triggered the genocide. Okay, so the Amalekites are being genocided because over 400 years prior, their great 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 grandparents did something to Moses, basically, when they were coming out of Egypt. And so the people who are living in that time, as Samuel is going down, or I'm sorry, is it Saul? Yeah, I think it's actually Saul. Yeah, it's actually Saul. So Saul is being
Yeah,
commanded to go.
Saul gets punished for not obeying God's direct order, which was the mass genocide of that.
Right. And
Yeah.
so in there it says, now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infants and suckling. Uh, Sorry, I lost it. Now go and strike Amalek and completely destroy everything that he has, and do not spare him, but put to death both man and woman, and child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Right. So these people, there's nothing in the Bible that indicates, like I hear the argument for Canaanites because Canaanites sacrifice babies, all that kind of stuff. The Amalekites didn't, or at least there's no evidence, biblical evidence for them doing it. Their only crime that is provided by the Bible, and the whole reason that they're being genocided is for the crime that happened over 400 years prior. So Saul is now being commanded to go in and kill babies and kill children and kill women and kill men and kill sheep, basically kill everything, right? And he actually gets in trouble because he doesn't do that, right? Because he spares the king and he spares the animals. And so
Yeah. So real quick, he spares all that stuff to take for himself. And
to give sacrifices. Yeah. He says he listened to the people. So this is an example of where somebody disobeyed God and listened to the voice of people rather than the voice of God.
Right. In which that would be a direct, rejection of what God has to say.
Mm-hmm. Right. But God is violating his own rule of thou shalt not murder, because these children that Saul is going in to kill are innocent. They don't deserve to die.
Who says that they're innocent? Just because it does not say that they were innocent.
Well, but you just said earlier, infants don't have any sin. They're not even old enough.
No, but it's the whole rescue. What I would say is that it's God literally rescuing these children from that kind of culture, because again, that kind of culture was pretty bad.
So killing a child is now saving them from the culture?
I would say, yeah. Because they didn't commit any sin and they're going straight to heaven. Now these other people who have sinned and who have done these things and gone against what God had declared and everything else.
But what was the culture of the Amalekites?
Well, I mean, we can see right here. Like, where are you reading from?
1 Samuel 15.
Oh dang, I was right here. I was literally there. Okay, hang on. There it is. Okay, so I mean, we can read like an entire chapter and books and everything like that, but what I'm trying to say here is that that there was a different culture and a different time, right? Like they had wrongs, okay, and they had to declare, okay, God declared that they would be destroyed because he was basically wiping out the sin from that area. Okay, so again, we can read this if you would like. We can read the entire chapter.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. That's what I'm saying. The only documented crime that they're being genocided for is not the crime they've committed themselves. It's a crime that their great grandparents committed.
They did nothing else wrong. They did nothing else wrong. They didn't follow those kind of,
like follow idols and stuff. No, there's no documentation of that in the Bible. That's what I'm saying. Like, and God literally says he's sending Saul because of what their great grandparents did, not because they're currently worshiping idols and currently doing bad things, but they're being genocided for what their great grandparents did. So this is actually a violation of two laws in one.
Right. So okay, well that's a stretch, but anyway, we can talk about that. But here's the problem here. Okay. When it naturally, right, when you come from a generation, okay, 400-year generation, I mean, naturally, the generation that followed that past generation would pretty much be doing the same practices. So
right.
The ones that their fathers did, they would have done themselves. But here's the thing, though. The Bible doesn't necessarily go straight off of what the Bible has to say, because again, people say it's man-made and it's just a story and it was just made up.
But this stuff right here goes off of straight history. So I mean, like the whole 400-year thing and all that. Like, do you get that straight from the Bible? I'm actually asking because I'm not an expert on the Old Testament.
Say that one more time. What was the question?
So when you said that that the Amalekites, right? They like they were just doing, like they were just doing, or they were getting punished rather for the sins that their grandfathers did.
Yeah.
Like, is that in the text? I do want to know if that's in the text.
Yeah, it is. So let me, and actually, I just had to look because I couldn't remember exactly what the Amalekite did.
Yeah, I just want to read it with you. Like
Yeah.
We can get to
I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, in that he obstructed him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. And so what happens is Moses is coming out of Egypt, and the Amalekites, so the great grandparents, attack Moses and his people from behind. So, and that's their crime, is that they attacked Moses and the Israelites as they were coming out. And so in 1 Samuel 15, 2 is where he says, this is what the Lord of armies says: I will punish Amalek for what he did to Israel, and that he obstructed him on the way while he was coming up from Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and completely destroy everything that he has, and do not spare him, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so this gets into the thing that we were talking about like the slavery stuff. Like when it comes to property, okay, property would be basically like everything that the king owned, right? And we're talking about that culture. We're not talking about what we would believe now. Okay, we're just going off of what they believed. And so Amalek, right, what he did, and then the Amalekites, see, they're literally the Amalekites, Amalek, they're literally called from him. Okay, they're identified as his people. Okay, and so they're I mean, naturally that follows they would be doing the same thing that they were probably commanded to do, and so they would have the same sins as Amalek did.
Well, this is over 400 years later. So Saul is being.
Go ahead.
And that's what I'm saying is we can't add to the text, right? So if they were like every other like Canaanites and all those, God says they are doing this right now, and that's why I'm sending you to go and conquer their lands, right? Because
it's the whole thing, it's the whole shebang. Like what I'm saying is, like, if you get rid of the whole structure of things, and that's what God's trying to do, is get rid of the entire structure of things so that it don't continue to happen. That's what I'm saying. I'm not adding to the text. I'm just trying to explain to you why I think that this is not necessarily the wrong that you're trying to portray it is.
But the Amalekites aren't doing anything wrong. The Amalekites that are living and breathing, the men, women, and children that are living and breathing when Saul comes and genocides them,
but
they are not the ones that attacked Moses when he was coming out of Israel.
But again, who says that they're not doing anything wrong?
The lack of anything in the Bible. That's what I'm saying. You have to add to the text and say they are doing something wrong, because the Bible does not say they are doing something wrong.
No.
The Bible says that they are being punished for what happened over 400 years ago.
Yeah, so the Bible doesn't say that they're innocent either. So really, this is just it's an argument from silence. So you're basically going to say, you're adding to the text by saying that, okay, they haven't done anything wrong. They didn't do what Amalek did and all this stuff, which that naturally doesn't follow. So
it does. I'm
not adding to the text. If anybody's adding to the text, I'm sorry, respectfully, you are, because you're saying that they're not doing anything wrong. So God's literally taking of innocent people.
Can you show me where it says that they were doing something wrong?
Because they're following Amalek. Even though it was 400 years ago, that was the culture back then. They followed what they're lit.
Can you show me where
after this guy?
Can you show me where it says that they're following Amalek's deeds?
What?
Because Amalekites are just the people from Amalek.
Exactly. So they're his people.
Right, but that doesn't.
They would do the same thing that he would have done, naturally.
But okay, can you show me where it says that?
But that's what it is. So again, show me in the text where it says that they did not do anything wrong. See how we can just go back and forth like that.
Yeah. So
the narrative of the passages is saying.
So if I come to you and I say, hey, Mitch, I'm gonna have to take you to jail, right?
Mhm.
And I'm gonna have to take you to jail because your great 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 grandfather was selling moonshine, right?
It's not the same.
Does that mean that you're doing anything wrong in that moment?
But again, that's not doing the same thing, because
But you're
we're talking culture here. We're talking culture here.
right.
Okay?
But you would be of your great 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 grandfather. So does that mean you're also selling moonshine?
No.
Right. So that's what I'm saying is just because they're Amalekites
Same
doesn't
thing.
mean they're
Within culture, let's just say that Amalek, worshipped idols and stuff like that. Let's just say that he personally did, okay? And he was over these people. Okay. What then would happen? That would become part of the culture. So let's bring it back to your analogy. If my grandfather sold moonshine, and then I come from him, right? And then I start doing it because I know that that's all I know. That's all I'm practicing. That's all I've seen in front of me, right? And then I start doing it. Then that becomes my sin. Do you
right.
understand?
But just because your grandfather did it 400 years ago, does that mean you're doing it now?
If my father did it, if the father before him did it, and everything else, and if I was
We
taught to do
we
so,
we
yes, I would do it.
we don't have that data though. That's what I'm saying. The only data we have is the
But we don't have
Amalekites
the data that they're doing it.
400 plus years ago attacked Moses, and now over 400 years later, the people who are living and breathing are being punished for that crime that happened 400 years ago. It literally says, "I'm
Yeah,
punishing you for the thing that happened 400 years ago." It's not
right.
saying I'm punishing you for what you're doing now,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I'm saying is
So
these
again,
people who have nothing to do with the crime that they're being punished for are being punished for that crime, and it's their great great grandfathers and stuff. So again,
yeah,
we have the children of these people who are paying for the iniquity of their fathers.
No, because again, nowhere in this passage says that they're innocent.
No,
You-
where does it say they're guilty? But where does it say they're guilty of?
because they're
Of
from
crime?
this person. I can keep saying it over and over again.
So
But
again, if your grandfather sells moonshine, then you must be guilty of selling moonshine.
if I do it as well, that's I've already went down
Right,
that.
but that's what I'm saying. Show me where they are doing it as well.
Okay. All right. We can move on because we're just kind of bumping into each other here. Because, I mean, obviously, this is the culture back then. This is what would happen. So if you were from somebody else and your name that you're accounted to, okay, is literally from the name Amalek, you are his people. You do the things that he did. That's
And what did he do though? But what did he do?
what did it say that he did?
He attacked Moses.
yeah. And so what I would say,
Okay. Now again,
we can keep going back and forth because it doesn't say that they were innocent. And honestly, in the whole structure of things, right? When you get to like the New Testament, you can say that there is none righteous. So honestly, everybody's guilty.
Oh, I love that you brought up that verse because do you know what the original context of that verse is?
Yeah. Go for
Okay,
it.
so the original context of that verse is it's being said to people who have turned away from God,
Mhm.
right? Because in the New Testament, there are absolutely people who are righteous, who are perfect even, right?
Where?
What's that? Who?
Where?
Let's see.
Who in the New Testament is perfect and righteous?
I'll get it for you. I
And
can't remember right off my head.
I wouldn't go to the rich young ruler either.
Yeah, no. So Luke 1, 5 through 6.
So real quick, while you're looking this up,
The whole narrative of Romans is showing the total depravity of man. Okay, I'm not Calvinist, but I can get down with the total depravity thing because none is righteous, no, not one. Okay, and this jumps into Psalm, I believe it's I believe it's Psalm 14.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's a direct, right? And it says that there is none righteous, no, not one. None seeks after God. This is just, it says none. So that means that we have all turned aside, in which it says.
Right.
So
and Paul's trying to say that
that means
everybody on earth.
That means everybody.
Yeah, Paul's trying to say everybody on earth, but in Psalms 14, he's specifically talking about a certain demographic. It's a group of people who have turned away from God,
Which
right?
is
So
everybody.
he's not saying everybody in the world. No, it wasn't everybody.
No, it was everybody, because again, the next chapter tells us that we were all, right, a product of Adam's sin. Okay, so Adam, through one man, it says, through one man came all unrighteousness upon all. And then, but with one man, Jesus, we were all saved. Or
Yeah,
we can be saved.
right. There's the problem is
There's
that
a lot
would
there.
that would then like I said, my interpretation and stance is that it's talking about certain people who have turned away from God and who weren't living. Because I mean, clearly David is writing this psalm. He's still righteous, right? The Bible says he's righteous.
No,
but anyways,
perfect. I mean, we literally just went through the passage where he killed somebody or he murdered somebody. So no.
I'm with you, but trust me, that's another contradiction that we can get to later.
Okay,
it says David
sure.
only committed one sin. But anyway, so in the New Testament, Luke 1:6 says, "In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous in the sight of God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and requirements of the Lord."
Yeah. Okay.
So there's two people that are righteous right there.
Yeah. So again, the whole narrative of it, okay, and what I'm saying here is that right here you got to understand that these people are born again.
No, Jesus isn't even born yet.
It doesn't matter. The whole born again passage, even when he's talking to Nebuchadnezzar. Wow. I said Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, when he's talking in John 3, okay, he tells Nicodemus, he says that you're the ruler, or you're the teacher of Israel, and you don't even know about the being born again. It was in Ezekiel 36. Okay, they was still being born again, because again, in and you would know this in Romans 5, right? It talks about, or sorry, Romans 4. I keep getting Romans 4 and Romans 5 mixed up. Sorry, I apologize. But in Genesis 15, okay, Abraham believed God and it was counted to him righteousness. What does that mean?
It means that Abraham obeyed the commandments and did as God instructed.
It means that he has faith. And if he has faith, then he is born again.
But how is his faith demonstrated?
By works.
Right. So if when God told him take Isaac and go sacrifice him, if he would have sat on the couch and said, "Look, God, I believe in you, but I just can't do that. That's my son," right? Yeah. Then he wouldn't have been counted as righteous.
Right, but that wouldn't have naturally followed. Because again, if you look into Ezekiel 36, it says that I will put my spirit in you and he will cause you to do my statutes and commands.
Ooh, dang, that's a bad one for Christians right there.
Sure, if you say so, but okay. you don't really sound agnostic, honestly.
What? Because
you sound like you've already made up your mind.
No, well, I don't think you were on Kenesha's whenever we got to it, but my belief currently is I did believe I was a Christian, right? Had the whole rebirth, had the whole emotional thing, got really heavy into the belief and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And then to me, my belief, and this is kind of what Kenesha and I got into, is I'm not saying that Yahweh isn't the God, right? I'm just saying that the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, is a man-made creation that puts their own desires and words on the lips of the true God that really is good and pure, right?
So how do you get to know that one true God that is named Yahweh?
Well, so man, it's like there's a whole like backstory to
Yahweh is
everything.
Hebrew. Yahweh is a Hebrew name.
Well, Yahwism goes long before Proto-Hebrew.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can, we can't really get into that because I don't know nothing about any of that. But what I'm saying is that the Bible, right, in Hebrew, right, Yahweh is a
Yeah.
Hebrew name
Well,
for God. That's their Hebrew name for God. Okay,
well,
so
it's a tetragrammaton in it, but the thing is that the Israelites took the Yahweh God and basically kind of made. I mean, this is the claim. I'm not saying I subscribe to this belief. I'm just telling you, like the history that
sure,
you'll hear from scholars, and that is that the Israelites took Yahweh and they kind of did their own spin on the
yeah.
Yahweh
Well, I
God.
mean, you say scholars, but there's a an endless supply of scholarship, and they're literally on both sides of the spectrum. So you
Right.
can't claim scholarship because scholarship would be on my side or the skeptic side. Like,
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
yeah, so
absolutely.
you can't say scholarship, dates that back. And no, that's just that.
Right.
I would say that that's skeptic scholarship. But anyway,
Hmm.
so anybody can take anything and really twist it and make it say something that it never does, even in historical. Okay, and it's even it could. And I'm not saying this is, but I'm just saying, like, there has been times where skeptic scholarship has been proven wrong just via history.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm
So
not
just
disagreeing at all.
because a group of scholarship says that Yahweh, the name Yahweh, was taken and twisted, that doesn't necessarily mean it's true.
Well, yeah, they're not saying taken and twisted. They're just saying that Yahwism. I mean, there's archaeological evidence that Yahwism existed before the Israelite Yahweh, right? They're just saying that Yahweh is the Israelite version, but
But
that's
we
totally a
can.
distraction from.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
but let's just jump to Jeremiah 8:8 because I do just want to kind of give you a little bit of a backstory so that I don't sound like just a crackpot to you and the audience.
No,
Um,
look. I just want to clear this up. I'm not mad at you. I'm not even mad. I'm just I just
yeah.
get loud sometimes. I apologize. Okay,
No,
but
I'm yeah,
I'm not trying
passionate.
to.
Yeah, passionate. And me too. I'm not getting mad. I don't take this stuff
No.
personal or anything like that. But so Jeremiah 8:8 though,
Okay.
it says, "How can you say we are wise and the law? How can you say we are wise and the law of the Lord is with us? But behold, the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie." Right.
Mhm.
So in Jeremiah 8:8, it's saying that there's been scribes who have come along and corrupted the book of the law, and people are reading it and they're being deceived by
Sure.
these laws, right? And then if we jump over to Ezekiel 20:25, and this is the one that still gets me to this day, like I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it and understand it. It says, this is God speaking. He says, I also gave them statutes that were not good and ordinances by which they could not live. So it's saying God himself gave ordinances that were not good, or gave statutes that were not good, and ordinances by which they could not live. Now, the question becomes, are we talking about the statutes and ordinances that are in Deuteronomy and Leviticus? Because if so, there's a big problem because Deuteronomy 30 says that he set before you life and death, good and evil, and all of that, and that the law is basically only good, right? So then, like I said, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this and understand it, but
Yeah.
what are these statutes that he gave, right? What are these statutes that were not good, and what are these ordinances that he gave that people couldn't live by?
Well, I think it would be. I think that Romans would clear a little bit. Maybe would attempt to clear this up a little bit. I think when it comes to, just what Paul says, that the law, without the law, we wouldn't know sin, and he says that under the law we are under a curse. That does not make the law a curse, but that's showing us our
Mm-hmm.
sinful ways and leading us to the true God, which is what the narrative would be, the argumentation of Paul.
So
And so
I've got big problems with Paul, just so you know, and
I'm
we can
sure you
flesh
do.
them.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. But the Christian text, right, was mainly written by was
mostly written by Paul. So, you know,
It wasn't though. Yeah, it wasn't. That's a Christian.
again, it was, but okay, that has been proven that it has actually been dated back. Not as early as Paul lived, right? But we can date it around that time. Okay. And also,
No, I'm saying he's. Yeah, sorry, I was saying he's not the majority of the New Testament. There's more words.
Okay. So
yeah,
sorry, misunderstood.
Yeah, there's more words in Luke alone than there are in all of Paul's epistles combined.
Okay, well, we can discuss. I'm not following. So so what? Real quick, let's just. I just want to clear this up. What are you saying about Paul? Like, did you say that he didn't write the majority?
No, I'm saying that he is like the Christian claim is that Paul is half of the New Testament and that he's the majority of the New Testament, which isn't true. He has more epistles than anybody else, but word for word, there's more words in Luke's gospel alone than all of Paul's epistles combined. So it's kind of like an illusion. He has more epistles, so it looks like
that's all we're saying. That's all we're saying. We're not saying that the content inside of those books are more than or the majority of the text. We're saying that he wrote the majority of the New Testament. And when we say that, we're saying he wrote more books than anybody else. That's what we're saying.
But when I have conversations with people and they say, "Oh, so you just want to throw out half of the New Testament?" It's actually only a small percentage.
Half of the books and letters in the New Testament is what they would be saying.
Well, yeah, I'm sure.
Okay. Anyway, because again, like you have, if we can date all of Paul's letters back to Paul, right? For argument's sake, let's just say that it was Paul that wrote all of his books that he claims that he wrote. You would have the 4 Gospels. Okay. You would have Acts. All right. So that's 5. And then you have 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. Okay. You have James, you have Hebrews, which some speculate that Hebrews, was written.
Yeah.
By Paul, writer. No one really knows who wrote that. And so again, like Paul wrote more in a span, right? More than John did, more than Peter did. They all had their own epistles, but he had more than all of them, right? In their own.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So that's all we're saying. Anyway, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, and I'm glad that we can flesh that out. Yeah, because I agree. There are more epistles, but even like page for page, Paul it's just a small percentage of the
sure, and I would agree with that. But like he wrote 13. And nobody else wrote 13, so or anywhere close to it. But anyway, so back to this. You said Ezekiel 20 and 25.
Ezekiel 20, 25,
yeah, 20, 25. So so let's see. Moreover, I gave them statutes that were not good, and rules by which they could not have life. Now, again, they could not have life. Rules so they could not have life. So again, the living by the statutes and commands were not what gave them life spiritually. Okay, and this is what I believe he's saying. Because like the rules of the law was not given to us to where we would have salvation, because that would be works based, and Christianity is not work based. And so right here again, what Paul says is that the law was given to us to understand really what God had to say about morality and everything else. Like, he says that I would not have known to not covet had it not been for the law. Right. So he's saying that the law cannot save you. By no means the law can save you. And please don't bring up James 2, because I'm frustrated with that, because nowhere in James does it ever, and I'm not even going to say that because you haven't brought that up yet. But Paul says that we cannot be justified by the law. The law we cannot be justified, period. And so that I believe this is what he's saying, because it's like he says, I gave them statutes that were not good, meaning righteous, that it could not justify to them. Okay, and again, this is not me adding to the text.
This is me taking the entire narrative of Scripture and bringing it together to interpret what this says, which is what we should do. And so when it says which they could not have life, right? And so again, life in the biblical aspect, when it's talking about the law or when it's talking about rules and statutes and commands and everything else, that would more or less be speaking of spiritual life, okay, which would, that's basically the narrative of the Scripture, which is, the law could not save us because, again, Abraham in Genesis 15, it was counted to him righteousness. That was before the law was even given to Moses. So he could not have been justified through.
Yeah, Abraham had the law. Abraham had the law. Noah had the law.
No, not the law of Moses. No, because Moses wrote it.
Well, so God is re-giving the law to Moses after 400 years of slavery.
Yeah. So what I'm saying here, okay, and again, what I'm saying here is that the law, the written code, the law, was not given to Abraham or Noah.
Can I show you where?
Abraham,
can I show you that it,
Moses.
Yeah, can I show you that it was?
Go ahead.
Let's see. So, one that you'll probably remember from memory is Noah knew clean animals from unclean animals, right? He had to select clean and unclean animals. Excuse me, animals. So he had the law of what was clean and unclean, and then
I said the written law.
Right. Yeah, and that's.
I'm not saying that God didn't command, Moses or Noah to do certain things. I'm saying the written law. I said written law. So,
right.
So the law was not given yet.
This would be
justify.
Well, let me find it here real quick. Because it'll be one of those like, what does the text say type things, like, and the whole adding to the text thing. So Genesis 26:5, because that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws.
Yes. Again, it was not written.
Can you show me where it says it wasn't written?
Oh boy.
But I'm holding you to the same standard that you're holding me to, right? You're saying does it say the baby suffered, and does it say this? Well, if it doesn't say it, then you can't.
It says that Moses went up to Mount Sinai and got the written code, the law, and that's what he received from the mount.
Mm-hmm.
And he came down with the written law. So again, and plus Paul tells us that it wasn't given at that time. So I know that you don't agree with Paul, but that's what Paul says. So
right. Well,
so again,
Paul also
Scripture.
Yeah, Paul also says that an angel gave Moses the law. And Paul's quoting Jubilees. He's referencing Jubilees.
Okay, so again, how did God give certain things to certain people? Through his messengers.
Well, in Exodus, it says God is speaking directly to Moses, and Moses is writing down the law.
Yeah.
Like I think you just said that. And in Jubilees, God sends the angel of the presence, and the angel of the presence is giving the law to Moses, which is what Paul is referring to when he says the law was mediated by angels.
I'm sorry. What? Where are you quoting this from?
Oh, where Paul says it? It's in Galatians. Let's see.
Sorry, I thought you said Jubilees, which is
that's what Paul is quoting and referencing is Jubilees. Okay. So Galatians 3:19.
3:19. Okay.
It says, wherefore then serveth the law? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made, and it was ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator. So ordained by angels in the hand of a mediator, that's Paul referencing and quoting Jubilees, which is where the angel of the presence is speaking the history. Jubilees is a rewrite of it's a like a 2nd century BCE rewrite of Genesis and Exodus. And in it, Moses is receiving the law from the angel of the presence. So the angel of the presence is speaking the history to Moses, and he's writing down the law for Moses, and he hands it to Moses. Whereas in Exodus, God is speaking directly to Moses, and Moses is writing the law down.
So you said that Jubilees is a 2nd century document?
Yeah, 2nd century BCE.
So how would Paul be referencing a 2nd century document when he lived in the 1st century?
BC, 2nd century BC.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I get it mixed up all the time.
I'm just trying to clear that up because you said 2nd century, so I was like, oh.
Yeah. No, I
get
it mixed up too. No worries.
Yeah.
BC.
Okay, cool. All right. So, but either way, it says, and it was put in place through angels by an intermediary. Okay, so I can't really read too much, but
but what it's saying here is that, again, put in place through angels. Okay,
right.
Not it was given to and by angels.
It says, having been ordered through angels at the hand of a mediator until the seed would come to whom the promise had been made. So let me give you the full context of Jubilees. So what happens in Jubilees is, and the reason that Paul is saying that it was given on account of transgression by the angels at the hand of a mediator. So what happens in Jubilees is God foreknows the transgressions of Moses and the Israelites, and the law is already present in heaven. So the angel of the presence, God comes down and he speaks to Moses and he says, I'm going to give you the law and the history and all that kind of stuff. And then he commands the angel of the presence to take the heavenly tablets, which already have the law on them, right? And he tells the angel of the presence to then give the law and the history to Moses. So then the whole rest of Jubilees is the angel of the presence giving the law to Moses, giving him the history, and all that kind of stuff. Now, again, the whole reason that the angel of the presence had to come and give it to him is because of the transgression that God knew that they were going to do. And he's giving it to them because it's the golden standard, right? It's the law that's already present in heaven, and he's bringing it to the humans on earth because they're about to transgress. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, that's where Paul is. Because there's no angels giving the law to Moses, right? And again, this isn't even like me. I didn't just make this up. This is just a well-known thing that a well-known quote from Paul that he's referencing Jubilees. So, but the issue becomes, Paul doesn't just quote Jubilees. He quotes ancient poets. He quotes his origin story, for example, like when he says Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus, and Jesus says it's hard for you to kick against the pricks. That whole scene is directly out of the Bacchae, where Dionysus and Pentheus. Pentheus is the man that's persecuting the followers of Dionysus. Dionysus appears to him and says, "It is hard for you to kick against the pricks." So Paul quotes all kinds of.
I mean, yeah, but hang on a second. So the Didache, you said the Didache, right?
No.
You said the Didache.
Bacchae, the Bacchae.
Okay.
A play written by Euripides in 409 BC.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, we can look into all that. No.
Yeah, I know I'm totally blindsiding you. I'm not trying to catch you up or trip you up or nothing.
Yeah. I want to talk. I want you to give me all that. Okay, not right now. I want you to give me that on the side so I can go look at all.
Yeah. Sorry, like I said, I'm not trying to trip you. It's just the hard part for me is that when you start trying to use Paul to justify certain things, to me, like, so John 12:48 is a big one for me, and that I feel like every Christian should just know that verse.
Before we get to that, though, I do want to stay in here real quick because again, the way that it says, in Galatians 3:19, it says, "Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions. It was added. Okay. So meaning it didn't already exist on earth. Is what, it wasn't given to
in Jubilees. Yeah, in Jubilees.
I don't
like
care.
I said,
Look, but what I'm saying here is, what does it say in the Bible and what does it say right here? Okay. So let's
they're
keep
two
reading.
different. They're two different things. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Well, but again, I would like to look deeper into that. I'm not just going to.
Yeah, sure.
Until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made. Okay, so the promise had been made to the offspring, which is the offspring of Abraham, and it was put in place through angels, not given by angels. It was put in place through angels, meaning they were the missionaries. They were the ones that went back and forth. They were the they did the work of God by giving certain things to certain people. Okay. But again, like let's just read up real quick. It says in verse 15, to give a human example, brothers, even with a man-made covenant, no one annuls it or adds to it, right? Once it has been ratified. Now, the promises were made to Abraham. Okay, so the promise was given to Abraham. All right, the promise, not the law, the promise. Okay, and to his offspring. Okay, it does not say to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. Okay, been a long day. I apologize. This is what I mean. The law, right, which came 430 years afterward, does not annul a covenant previously ratified by God, but as to make the promise void. Okay, for if the inheritance, all right, comes by the law, okay, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham. God gave it to Abraham by promise. So before we get to 19, the whole narrative here of what Paul is saying, okay, and what he clearly is stating, all right, is that the covenant, the promise that God made with the offspring of Abraham, was not made through the law. Because if it was made before the law and through the law, then it would become void, because the law was not the law, right? We are not under the law as Christians. Okay. We still uphold it, but we are not under the law, meaning under sin. Okay. So right here it says the law, which came 430 years after the promise was made. All right. That way, right, the inheritance would come by the law that would no longer make it a promise. Okay. But God gave the promise of salvation to Abraham by the promise, not by the law. But the law was given way after, 430 years to be precise, afterwards. Okay. And then you get to verse 19. Why then the law? It was added because of transgressions. So again, just what Paul says beforehand, or in the same passage, he says that the law was given so that we would know our transgressions. We would know our sin. Okay. Because it was written down. We could go by it easier if it was written down. Until the offspring should come to whom the promise had been made. And it was put in place, not given. The law was not given by the angels, but it was put in place through the angels. Okay. And so now the intermediator, right, implies more than one, but God is one. Okay. So again, is the law then contrary to the promise of God? Certainly not. For if a law had been, I'm almost done. For if a law had been given that could give life, then righteousness would indeed be by the law. But the scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ, might be given to those who believe. Okay. So again, nowhere in here does it say that angels gave the law. Okay. But actually it says that God gave the law. Okay. But it was after the promise, which was made to Abraham. So again, that's the whole structure of things. Do you have anything to add to that? I know that was long, and I apologize for that.
No, you're fine. And so here's the issue that I have, right?
Mm-hmm.
The verbiage is plain and simple to me. Would come to whom the promise had been made, and it was ordained through angels by a mediator. So how does Exodus say Paul, or I'm sorry, not Paul? How does Exodus say Moses received the law? Was it through angels or was it through God?
God.
So God ordained the law to Moses.
God gave the law.
Right. But what Galatians 3:19 is saying is that angels gave the law. The law
No,
was ordained through.
It says it was put in place through
What
angels.
what translation are you looking at there?
ESV.
Right. So again, in Jubilees, what's happening is the angel of the presence is putting in place. He's giving Moses the law for him to enact. Right. So the angel of the presence in Jubilees is putting in place. He's ordaining the law to Moses. Whereas Exodus say it is not an angel, it is God who is putting in place and ordaining the law to Moses.
And Paul also says in Galatians 3, what we just read, that it was not given by angels, but it was given by God.
Where does it say that it was given by God?
Well, it does not say that it was given by angels. It says it was put in place through angels. Okay.
Right. And how is it put in place?
But it says here, now an intermediary, okay, implies, it's hard to say that word, implies more than one, but God is one. Okay. So it was given, all right, right here. Is then the law contrary to the promises of God? So again, God gave the promise. All right.
So, but
hang on.
Just to stay on that verse. Now, a mediator involves more than one party. When God gave Moses the law, was there more than one party beneath God receiving that law or communicating that law, or was it communicated straight from God to the one party?
Well, no, but also, we can see, like, for instance, like what, and I know that you would disagree with this too, but us as Christians believe that Jesus, the pre-incarnated Christ, was also the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament. And so, like, whenever God speaks directly to Moses through the burning bush, it says that the angel of the Lord was in the burning bush. All right. So again, it would be more like there would not be two parties. It says this implies that there are more than one, but God is one. So that's implying that it was God that did it, but it seems like it's two, but it's actually just one.
Right, but staying in the flow or the context of
which would be Jesus is God. So if Jesus was the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, and it was given by the angel of the Lord, or it was given through the angel of the Lord, then that would seem like it would imply that, by taking the words of Paul, the exact words, it says implies more than one, but no, that God is one.
Right. The reason that Paul is saying now a mediator involves more than one party is because in Jubilees you have more than one party that is a mediator.
Yeah.
So you have God who's giving it to the angel of the presence, who's mediator number one, and then you have Moses who then gives it to the people, who's mediator number two. So in Jubilees you have multiple mediators, whereas in Exodus you have one mediator, and that's Moses.
Okay, so tell me again what Jubilees is.
Jubilees is a second century BCE rewrite of both Genesis and Exodus.
So it's a rewrite.
It's probably like a Babylonian rewrite because of like the calendar system it tries to use. But
So you're going to use that to interpret what the Bible says.
No, because no. I mean, it's like I said, this isn't something that's contested. Like even Christian scholars will tell you that Paul is quoting Jubilees here. It's not
Okay,
something
again,
it's not something that's contested or anything.
okay, well, again, like you say that Christian scholars agree to that. I would like to test that. We don't have to.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would like to test that. So again, I would want you to, in some way, shape, or form. I'm not sure how to get in touch with you, outside of YouTube, but we can discuss that in just a minute. But I would like you to give me these sources because, the whole, you said it was Babylonian. Okay. It was, known to be Babylonian, right?
No, that was me just giving my opinion because it prescribes a 364-day calendar year, which the Babylonians were trying to play a lot with the calendar and time and stuff.
Yeah. So like, okay, this goes into like the Gnostic Gospels and stuff like that. Like we can look into the Gnostic Gospels and we can say, okay, well, this doesn't quite line up, right? Because, and again, I know that you would, I'm not sure if you would disagree with that or not. Many skeptics do disagree and would say, why do you discount the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Judas or anything like that? Those are forgeries. Just the dating alone, right? But when it comes to like Jubilees, okay, I don't necessarily want to take away or go outside because, you keep saying, let's not add to the text and let's not go outside of what the Bible says. Well, I'm wanting you to do the same thing because going to Jubilees is literally going outside of what we have now.
Right. No, the reason that we got on this topic is because I just said I didn't like Paul, and then we got talking about the law, and I just brought up that Paul quotes Jubilees, and that's just something that I feel like a lot of Christians don't know is that New Testament writers quote, like Jude quotes 1 Enoch, and all that. So a lot of Christians just don't know that the New Testament writers sometimes quote some of these other books that were in circulation at that time.
Sure, and I'll give you that. But again, what the Bible clearly states, okay, in Exodus and in Genesis, in Galatians, right here, it was not given by angels, but it was given by God. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and we can see that in Exodus it was given by God, but it was put in place through angels. Okay, so
but where does it say that in Exodus?
Where does it say that it was given by God?
No, that it was put in place by angels.
Well, but it says in Galatians. So again, the whole point of the New Testament is to basically open up the Old Testament, and everything plays out through Jesus. So that's the whole point of it. So like if there are things in the Old Testament that doesn't really necessarily make sense or kind of like kind of like up in the air, right? You would probably go to the New Testament and it would more than likely open the eyes and more or less open you up to the idea of Jesus and what he did in the Old Testament and leading up to his earthly existence and everything else. And so I would just like to encourage, okay, some of these things were pretty hard, okay, and we can move on. But some of these things were kind of hard, and I will give you that, okay, and I might have been wrong on it. You know what I mean? I might have been wrong on it. On the explanations to why certain things were done in the certain way that it was, because again, I'm not God. But the point here is that the whole Christian basis, everything that's based on Christianity, okay, is Christ. Okay, that's the whole point of calling it Christianity. And so even though some of the things that were done in the Old Testament would kind of look like, right, in some certain things, and some things, I'm like, kind of what? But the point is like, if you were once a Christian, okay, the unknown things that are kind of like it's hard to explain and hard to understand,
that shouldn't take you away from what Christ did on the cross historically. And so I would just encourage you to not necessarily base everything on certain passages that kind of just turn you off. I would encourage you, and I'm about to give you the last bit here, because I think let me post this real quick, and I'll say my last bit. Because I would like to. I mean, you brought up, man, you know your stuff, and I applaud you. You know more than I do, and I do applaud you for that. So look, keep studying, keep doing your stuff. But what I would, the last bit here, I would like to encourage you to look more towards the cross and what Jesus did historically accuracy, and just test that.
Well, and so, and I have, and yeah, and I definitely have, and yeah, I would love if you ever did just a live session about Paul, and you're open to counter arguments against Paul. I'll be the first one in line to go over that stuff, and I would love to discuss it with you beforehand, so that because I don't want to blindside you, right? I would rather us have a productive conversation where you've done some research and you can come back at me. I don't want to just sit here and just blindside you. So, if we could even set up just a discussion like that, where I can give you my evidence, you can test it, you can find counter arguments to it, and then maybe we can go on and discuss it.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, you know more than I do when it comes to that stuff. But again, like when I would like to ask real quick, and again, we can talk about it later. But when it comes to who Jesus was and still is, and the death and resurrection of Christ, what turns you away from that? What turns you away from your faith in that?
So
not the Old Testament, but what Jesus did.
Right. So it starts with you can't have the New Testament without the Old Testament, right? So I know Christians desperately want to divorce Jesus from the Old Testament, except for where there's those typological associations, because the problem is there are true Messianic prophecies. And I know the Christian argument of the Pharisees were dumb and they just couldn't see the spiritual truth that the law had.
I think they were very smart. And in fact,
Yeah.
Jesus says to be like the Pharisees, and which it means like to be smart like them when it comes to the scriptures and everything. And I just wanted to clear that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. And so like Ezekiel 37, right? That was a perfect thing for you to bring up because it just kind of
36
really wrecks the argument of Christians that the law is no more, right? Even though, of course, in Matthew 5, we have Jesus saying that the law is not abolished. It'll remain until heaven and earth pass. Anybody who does the law will be called good, or it's escaping.
Yeah, Christians don't believe that the law has passed.
They believe that they don't have to obey it for salvation.
No, for salvation, but we do still have to uphold it. We still have to live by it. Yes.
Right, and I would love to have a discussion on that's one of those Jesus versus Paul things, right? Because Jesus very clearly, if you were to just take away Paul and only read the Gospels and what Jesus teaches, then I think we can all agree that, in fact, I know people agree because this is the whole dispensationalism argument, right? That Jesus' gospel is only to the Jews, and therefore they are only the ones that have to keep the law and all that kind of stuff, right? Which that argument gets debunked by Jesus himself when he tells the apostles to go to all nations and teach them all things that he's commanded.
Sure.
But yeah, so getting back to the whole, like, with Jesus, right? Like I said, you have to have the Old Testament to have the New Testament.
Sure.
And so for me, I have to objectively evaluate, did Jesus fulfill the Messianic prophecies to be considered the Messiah? Because, I mean, that's exactly that the prophecies are given so that you can say, aha, that is the Messiah right there because these things are happening, right? That's exactly how God says, that I am real is because the prophecies I give come true, right? Sure. And so in Ezekiel 37, it's like what I see Christians doing is cherry picking parts of the Messianic prophecies and then they say, oh well, there, the second coming is going to happen, and then the rest of it's going to happen, right? But there's no second coming prophecy, right? There's just one coming. It doesn't say the Messiah is going to come, do a little bit of it, and then fulfill it.
Yeah, well,
point.
well, again, just real quick, that yeah, there absolutely is, and there's distinctions in the New Testament, and in fact, in Isaiah 65, it talks about the creating of the new heavens and new earth. That would be after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, and all these things. And again, we can talk about all these things. I'm just saying, when you say that there is none, that's just kind of unfair, because that there is in fact many. Talking about Christ ruling and reigning.
No. I said there's no prophecy for coming twice, for him showing up twice.
Well, yeah, there is. But anyway, go ahead. Because real quick, because again, there's messianic prophecies about his first coming, which would be, riding on the donkey, stuff like that. And I know people say, well, that can't possibly be Jesus, but again, we can talk about it. But then there's prophecies about him ruling and reigning. And so if he came lowly on a donkey, right, that's completely different than him ruling and reigning. So there's two different kinds of prophecies, messianic prophecies, right? There's him coming lowly as a child, okay? And then there's those that he is ruling with a scepter and a rod of iron. And so those two could not be in the same, right, being interpreted as the same coming. It would have to be another. And also, again, we would have to use the New Testament to interpret the Old when it comes to that stuff, because Jesus said, I'm not going to talk to you that much longer here, but I'm going up to the Father. And that's where I'm going to rule and reign. And so I would just say that there is distinctions between the two comings in the Old Testament when it comes to prophecies, but continue.
Yeah, and what you're describing is there's typological association. So like Matthew associating the virgin woman with Jesus, right? That's the context of that in the Old Testament is not a messianic prophecy, but Matthew has typologically associated it with Jesus. So there's things in the Old Testament that are messianic prophecies that say basically when the Messiah comes, blankety blankety blank is going to happen, right? And so I'm glad you brought up Isaiah 65, because this is another one that really works against Christians and thinking that the dietary laws are gone, because in both Isaiah 65 and 66, which, like you said, these are the final days when things are being destroyed and all that kind of stuff. Isaiah 66 is like,
well, it doesn't say anything about destroying. It just says that he's going to come in with the new heavens and new earth, in which that would be a different thing. Again, in the New Testament, there would be a distinction between him destroying all things and then him coming and creating a different new heavens and new earth. And so there's I'm trying to scrub my brain. It's been a little while since I read. I think 65. I think there's doesn't Jerusalem get restored first and then a new heaven and new earth comes, because the Messiah comes and then they bend their swords into plowshares, and then there's peace, and then new heaven and new earth, right? Like Jerusalem's restored for a period, and then I'll have to reread it and see. But anyways, the point that I'm making is Isaiah 66, for example, it says, for as the new heaven, no, that was the wrong one. No, that's the right one. For as the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, shall reign before me, saith the Lord, so shall your descendants and your name remain. From the new moon to the new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord. And then, and the dead bodies rebel against me. Oh, I went too far. Sorry, I'm a little rusty on the Isaiah 66 stuff. I haven't looked at it in a while. Okay, so Isaiah 66:17. Those who sanctify and purify themselves to go into the gardens, following the one in the center, eating
eating the flesh of pigs, vermin, and rodents shall come to end together, says the Lord. So right there in Isaiah 66, he's saying anybody who's eating pig's flesh is going to be destroyed. They're not going to make it into the promised lands, basically. Right?
Yeah.
They're
So,
not going to make it.
so the whole thing with eating pig's flesh would be more or less that would be basically like because again, like he says in Isaiah 65, right? He says that I am willing or I am ready to go after the ones that have not sought after me or have not came to me, have not tried to come to me or anything like that, and they eat pig's meat. So the whole distinction there was like not that that's still forbidden, because again, the New Testament clearly states that all things are made clean through Christ. And so that was just a foreshadowing in order to distinguish in the Old Testament, distinguish the children of Israel from the Gentiles. And so that's no longer needed because there is no longer Jew or Gentile anymore. So that part of it is no longer needed. And so that's not, so again, we I really want to talk to you more on the side, just like, conversation wise, because I think it's impossible to really flesh out every bit of this on here because there's so much, man. There's so much. So I would like to get, like, if you don't mind, I would like to just kind of ruffle through some of these things with you on the side. That would be great. And we can discuss this stuff on live. But when it comes to like all this incredible stuff that's coming out right now is it's a lot to go over in one live stream. So
Yeah.
I would like to go ahead. And
no,
plus
yeah,
on the side,
I definitely agree. Yeah, I definitely agree. There's some, like, even just the statement of all foods have been made clean. I've got, like I said, I'm willing to bet you're going to use Paul to show that, and I can show you how.
I use Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to talk about that real quick? I mean, that's
we can later. We can have a whole live discussion on that, just me and you. There's people waiting in the back.
Yeah.
But
can you bring on the XO guy, and I'll talk to him about it's okay.
It's fine.
I just checked the chat, and he says Brett has been correct about Jude quoting 1 Enoch. Jude 1:14-15 is literally a direct word for word quote from 1 Enoch 1:9.
Yeah, so we'll have a time to do that. I do want to stay in touch with you on the side though. So any way that you would like to like email or whatever like that, like if there's any, my email, I'm going to put down my email. So if you want to, you can just directly email, so you don't have to put any kind of information down.
Yeah, I'll get that.
We can get like on WhatsApp or anything like that. Because anybody that I talk to that's directly, within the YouTube perspective, right? Everybody from YouTube that I talk to is on WhatsApp. So if you have WhatsApp, that'd be great. If not, then we'll do something else. But I'm about to put that down there now. And then, hey man, look, thanks for the hard questions, man. That's always, certain things I just don't have the answer for. It's because I'm not God. So I think that the plain things, and I'll just leave you with this. I think the plain things in the New Testament that we can look to could definitely clear up some of the stuff that is just kind of unseen, certain things that are unseen, and so I would say that focus more on the cross rather than, other stuff that it's kind of hard to look at. So anyway, and I know you probably have, I'm just saying there's more in the cross than there is anywhere else. And that's where Christianity comes from. So if we're focused on other things, and then that gets us away from the faith, I think that's just kind of like, okay, well, maybe you didn't really talk to the right person or get the right resources or something like that. So we can.
And I'm always open. That's why. I mean, if my mind was made up, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be having these conversations. I'm always
right.
New evidence and all that kind of stuff. So,
well, I mean, I would say that, I have my mind made up, but I'm still going to have these discussions. So, but there's always room to grow. Okay. And so you've taught me something today, and I'm going to take into account, and I really appreciate you being on here, and you have held yourself. I think it was you that I was talking about earlier in the stream that, that every atheist and agnostic like the majority of them that I have talked to online have held themselves up with incredible, just an incredible way. And I really appreciate the way that you have held yourself. And thank you for that. And I think that's so important for us to have a discussion. If we just stop talking, then we'll never grow. And so I really appreciate you being on here.
Yeah, and same to you, man. I really appreciate you being willing to get out of the echo chamber and to hear other arguments and other sides, because there's a lot of people who aren't willing to do that, and I appreciate you creating a platform where people can come and discuss, and provide their evidence and that stuff.
Yes, sir. Okay, cool. Well, if you want to, you can stick around in the comment section. I'm going to take you down in the backstage. If you want to stick around, maybe I'll bring you back up.
Yeah.
And so, but hey, God bless, bro. Thank you for showing up.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Hey, Kanisha, how you doing?
What's up, dude? I didn't even know you were on. My bad.
Look, I didn't know I was on either. Okay.
I didn't know you're doing stuff around the house, and I just pick up my phone. I'm like, what the heck? He's on an hour ago?
Yeah, it's been a great discussion, and I'm sure we're about to have another one. So what's going on, CM? It's good to have you back. Yeah.
Good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. So we'll start with, I guess we'll start in whoever wants to bring something up. Let's go. So the topic again is no God, no morality. That's my statement. So if there's
you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, oh boy,
you're already right.
We're in it now. Uh-oh. Okay. So that would be my statement. Anybody that has any kind of objection.
Well, Mitch, on top of that, no God, no nothing. There's nothing without Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim, first of all. But the guy made a mention of what I claimed earlier, because it's weird how a lot of not only scoffers, but the flat earthers and all these truth cults like to talk about the book of Enoch, which is a fan fiction. That would be like saying the movie Saving Private Ryan is a documentary. Listen, they might have used real guns. They might have used real tanks. It may have even been filmed on Omaha Beach, but the movie Saving Private Ryan is fan fiction. It's fiction, and that's what the book of Enoch is. These oral traditions existed for hundreds of years. So when it talks about the thousands, or it talks about Enoch, those oral traditions were passed down, and that's what Jude 1 is referring to, the information of Enoch that existed for thousands of years. Yes, they also took that information and may have put some of it in the fictional book of Enoch, but that has absolutely nothing to do with Jude 1, and it does not match. Most importantly, it actually does not match the book of Enoch, showing that the book of Enoch could not even get the oral tradition correct. But I don't have a lot of time, so I'll let you guys do your thing, and you keep up the good work, Mitch. Maybe we'll talk in the future again. And I like what Kanisha does. If you're not subbed already to teach Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh or YHWH, please do that. But she has a great panel that she opens up every week or so. But I just want to point out that there's a lot of deception with the fan fiction, Mitch, that these extra books are not Bible and they're not even credible, to be honest with you, especially the book of Jubilees. There's a lot of evil satanic contradictions. And that's why the guy was talking about angels writing these things, angels giving the law. No, the angels never. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is the angel of the Lord. He is the one that approached himself unto Moses, obviously in Exodus 3. So those aren't just angels. Obviously, the angel of the Lord is the one who gets the credit. God himself is the one who writes the law and gives these statutes.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting to. And I'm not going to do too much on that because I don't have Brett up here to defend himself. So what I would encourage is that you two, maybe we'll I'll host a debate or whatever. That would be great for y'all two to kind of flesh this thing out. But hey, thanks for showing up, man. That's pretty good. So Brett, don't be mad, man. Don't be mad. I didn't know. So we'll flesh that out in another time. But anyway, so if anybody would want to bring up anything against the no God, no morality, that'd be great.
I loved what he said, XO said. But I'm going to go ahead and what is your name? Mr. Hyde go.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. I didn't notice that.
Cool.
How's it going? How's it going? Hey, thanks for the platform. Thanks for allowing me up.
Yeah,
What? Let me ask. What do you mean by are we calling it objective morality? I just want to make sure we're on the terminology first.
yeah. So it's basically objective morality versus subjective morality, and you can, in my claim, you can't have objective morality without God.
Well, I'll go along with the term for now, but it's a less important argument, but I think the terminology is impossible. I don't think it's possible to have an objective morality. I would go along with the concept of ultimate morality, but objective is just an impossible concept for morality. But that's the lesser concept.
Okay, and that would be, in my head, that those two would pretty much be the same. Is that like, anything that's ultimate would be like a moral ought. Okay, and that would be kind of where I'm at, is like, where does anybody get a moral ought? Because again, I can have an opinion, you can have an opinion, but that's not morality. That's not where morality should stand. Because if I believe that murder is okay, but you don't, then who's to say? Where's the justice? Where's the penalty for people who actually do the wrong? And that's where I would get my standards. That the God of the Bible would give us that standard.
Well, let's take a look. You used the example of murder, and I've actually I like this example. You, me, and somebody in another culture can all agree that murder's wrong, but there are some cultures that believe in executing apostates. Someone that leaves the faith, and that's not murder. That's a good thing. That's an act of worship, but we would call that murder. So we're calling the same thing wrong, but we have a different understanding of it. Isn't that subjective? And who's to say which murder is the right definition?
Well, again, like the murder, right? The whole thing with murder is like, if it's if they're innocent or not. And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I would say even with like the apostate killing of apostates, right? I'm not sitting up here trying to justify or not justify that. Like I have no. I'm not going to get into that, because the thing is like, God doesn't have anything to say. Well, he does, but what I'm saying here is like the whole point of murder and taking of innocent life would be on the table here for discussion. Is there actually a moral ought to not take of an innocent life? And that would be considered murder.
Okay. Well, I guess we're defining this objective moral ought as a real thing, that there is a true, correct, objective answer to this. And I'm just, once again, even given the definition of moral, I don't understand how that's possible, because moral is how we feel we should treat one another. It's about interpersonal relationships. And if there's a such thing as making a moral decision, in a moral decision, you're not deciding to do the right thing or not to do the right thing. You're deciding what is the right thing. But if morality is an objective fact, there's no deciding which is the right path. It's do it or don't. But when we look around, morality is everything interpreted how we understand it. And that's, by definition, subjective.
Okay, so I would say like the whole morality and ethics, right? Like ethics is in fact like, the right and wrong type thing to do, right? So if you have something that you ought not to do, okay, then that's like, okay, I ought not to go into my neighbor's house and steal their things. I ought not to do that. That is something that I should not do. Okay. But if it's all subjective, then who's to say that there's no justice for that person? There's nothing outside of that. And so that's where I would say that you would need a higher power to give us these things to look towards, so that we would know what we ought not to do.
Exactly. And if I could just intervene really quick. I mean, this is a question that I personally have not gotten a clear answer to ever by anyone who says that, morals are subjective, is who is the ultimate person to say that their decision is the right decision? Like, there has to be somebody who you would finally get to that would say, you know what, Their word is the final word, right? Because if everybody's just subject, then there is no right and wrong. Because your opinion can be, it's good to murder. Their opinion could be, it's okay on a Tuesday. My opinion could be, you don't murder. So whose opinion will be right, and who would we take it up to say which one gets the leeway to say it's okay this time or it's not?
I'm sorry, you cut off. Were you finished?
Yeah, I'm finished.
Okay, I'm sorry. It sounded like it cut off, and I didn't want to start talking over you. Um, am I the only non-believer up here? Because I don't want to be the only one speaking.
So can I kind of? I think earlier maybe I heard maybe Mitch. He said that anything that God does is objectively good. Is that true? Did I hear right, or maybe I misheard?
Yeah, because it, like, again, if God puts down a standard in a law, he would not go outside of that.
Okay.
That's my personal belief.
So does that mean that humans can do anything then that God does, and it will be objectively good?
Well, I'm saying, like, if it goes, like, there's right and wrong in the Bible, right? The Bible states that, like, in the state of laws, okay, the law that was given to us by God says what not to do and what to do.
So, like,
Okay?
let's say God says God does X, therefore X is objectively good. Does that mean then man can do X and it will be objectively good?
Hold on, can we go back to the statement that I made? Because I didn't want that to be brushed over.
Well, I think I can get to that. I kind of have to, though, get some foundation before I think I could get, but I was going to try to answer that directly, but I think I can get to it through this way.
Yeah, so I think whatever's written down in the scriptures would be the moral ought, what to do and what not to do.
So whatever God does is objectively good. That means,
well, there's certain things that God can do that we humans can't do.
But so is it still objectively good if he does it? All right. So let me ask this: if it something that God does that humans can't do, is it still objectively good?
Okay, say that one more time. Sorry.
So something that God does that humans cannot do, is that still objectively good?
Well, whatever God, like, what. So again, God gives us the standards, and again, God gives us the standards, right, and what to do and what not to do. So if God does something that goes contrary to that, that would be objectively wrong, and then vice versa. So again, like,
but are you saying we get the standards from what God says or by what he does?
Well, it's what he says. So he tells us, like, okay, it's the same thing as, like, you know, it's the same thing as, like, okay, I have two daughters, right? So if I was to tell both of them the same thing, right, I would say, okay, you ought not to put your hand on a burning stove, right? That's my law, right? That's my word. That's my rule, right? And so whatever I give to them, they ought not to do that. So if they do that, then they are to be punished.
So let me put it like this. Okay, let's say, CM, that you own a business, right? And I'm your employee. And I come in one day and I say, hey, I need you to change how you do your payroll. And I need you to stop ordering this type of paper and order that paper. Also, I don't like the fact that you wear blue suits. I need you to start wearing red suits. What would you say to me?
Right. So what you're saying is what you said to me is what is objectively good, not what you actually do.
So what would you say if I was your employee and you are the CEO of the company? What would you say if I came in and I said, this is how it's going to be? Even though it's your business and I'm your employee, I work for you. What would you say to me?
Well, I would probably restate the chain of command, but what I'm trying to get at is, initially I thought I heard that what God does is objectively good. It seems
He,
to be now it's what God says is objectively good.
so he is
So I'm
good.
just
So
trying
he
to
is
get
good.
the differentiation between those two.
He is all good. So that means what he does and what he says is all good. It's the same thing like if the example I just gave you, the CEO. Here we are as the employees trying to tell you how to run your business and telling you you need to change what you're ordering and changing this, and this is the standard. You're like, hold on, this is my business. How are you telling me about my business and what the standard should be when I'm
Like,
the owner of this company and I hired you?
so like I can give you an example, a direct example from the New Testament. So when Paul quotes, "Vengeance is mine," said the Lord, that's in reference to Christians not avenging themselves, right? So in that case, something God does is good, but wouldn't be good for a Christian.
Well, it would be more along the lines of like, again, within context of that, okay, he is referencing in the Old Testament. So basically, the human nature would be, okay, I'm going to go out and just straight up consume this person, right? You know what I mean? Like if this person done me wrong, I'm going to go ahead and just wipe them out. That's the human thing. Okay, so God's like, look, don't, because again, it all runs off of how we act as Christians. And again, the whole deal with Paul is basically giving us like, okay, don't give into anger, right? Don't give into, don't give into rage and wrath and everything else. Let God deal with stuff that you can't handle.
Right. The context of that Romans verse is to feed your enemy, give water to your enemy. It's basically along the line of the turn the other cheek, love your enemy.
Right. So again, don't give yourself to, don't give up to like wrath and anger and everything else.
Right.
Don't
So is vengeance then objectively good?
Well, again, like, we got to understand the context of what he's talking about.
Well,
So the whole point of vengeance is to anger and wrath, and that's not up to us.
So that goes back to my question: is what God does objectively good, or is it what He says to do objectively good?
Well, I think they're both hand in hand. I mean, whatever God puts down is what.
But you're saying there are certain things that God does that a human can't do, and it wouldn't.
Well, like he's good. Well, again, like in the concept of God, when it comes to Christians, is that He's all powerful, He's all knowing, He's all omniscient, and all that. So we're not that.
So then we can't know by what God does. We can only know by what He decrees or declares. So absence a clear statement, we can't know what is objectively good, right?
Right. So he gave us like commandments and statutes to live by, right. And that's pretty much the end of the story.
Right. So absent though a clear state, in other words, we can't follow the model concept, right? We can't watch God model for us what's good, because if we do what God does, we can fall easily into doing something that's not good because it's not our prerogative to do so, right? But we have to wait for a command from God to know what's good.
Well, we can watch His model. Okay, so right from the beginning, He said exactly what He wants us to do, and exactly what He did was create, be fruitful, multiply. He tells us all these good things, and He demonstrates that type of life. I mean, He leads you. He says that we have His Holy Spirit inside of us, who guides us to do so, and He is the example.
But like right there, Paul doesn't say be fruitful and multiply.
So what is this, like an anti-Paul thing or something?
No, Paul encourages abstinence if possible.
Read the whole context of that, because what he's saying is, if you can't control your urges and you can't do all this, he said, I'd rather you guys be. Yeah. So in context, he's not just saying nobody ever marries.
He's saying that you can marry. It's not sinful if you marry, right? In order for you not to sin,
Yeah,
not to give in
basically
to compulsion, right? But it's better to not marry. That's his.
Yeah. So, well, no.
Which does
in First Corinthians, hang on, in 1 Corinthians 7, right? He says it, and again, context is key. He says that I would rather. He says, for me, I would rather all you be like me, which would be single. But he says that if you can't keep yourself under control, right, then it's better for you to marry.
Right. So is be fruitful and multiply an objectively true command?
God gave us, right, the ability to come together and multiply and be fruitful.
But so is that an objectively
That's something, that's a gift from God that he gave us that we can do.
Yes, but that doesn't answer
But
the
we
question.
can also, well, it does answer the question.
Paul's telling us to ultimately you would be better off not being fruitful and multiplying.
No, that's not at all what he says. He says that he would personally
prefer, right? Ultimately, you would be better off.
But because of why? He says so that we can all go out and preach the gospel, and the gospel would be more preached.
Well, he says the current age is passing away.
So the way
now treat as though you have no wife, possessions.
Yeah.
Because he's expecting Jesus to return. So it's a
So the thing is like whenever he says, like he says, with a man that's married, he is more receptive to care for the material world or care about, like, say, money or something like that, because he has to take care of his wife and her needs, and vice versa for the wife for the husband. So it's like this is, I don't even understand the point, because it's like he's saying this is a gift from God, but because we need to push the gospel out, I would rather you be like me, but do this because God gave you this. I would rather you be like me, but you can do this. So you have two options.
Wait, so you're saying that Paul is saying, I would rather you not follow God's objective commands?
Kanisha, can you maybe I'm not clear. Go ahead.
Oh, I think you're clear.
I feel
I'm just trying to untangle what that could mean.
There's no tangling. It's simply clear. Okay.
Paul is saying that he would prefer you not marry and multiply.
That is not part of God's law.
What is not part of God's law?
To be fruitful and multiply.
I didn't. Kanisha, you just said that was part of.
That was
no, I didn't say that. What I said was, hold on, CM.
Well,
what I said is that God gave us the example. You said that God, so we're not supposed to follow his example, just do what he says. I said, no, we can follow God's example. He tells us to be fruitful and to multiply. That's what I said.
Right, and Paul.
But that's not part of his law. So that's not something that's like that. That's
exactly.
Not a moral command. That's not a moral command.
Not only that, Matthew, in the Gospel of Matthew talks about eunuchs, those who can understand. Basically, those
hold on.
Made
Can I pause you, CM? Can I pause you real quick? What does this have to do with morals?
It has everything to do with morals. Isn't being fruitful and multiplying, reproduction?
I know, but where are you going with this? Like, I feel like you're just kind of like going in a circle right now, and I don't understand where you're going.
I'm trying to show that if we can't follow what God does as objectively true, and we have conflict on what God says as being objectively true. But I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think the problem with any objective moral or ethics is no one can agree on what they are, even if they exist.
And that's why there has to be a moral ought, because
but it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is no one has interpreted the same interpretation of any of the commandments of God. So
that's not true.
There's disagreement over almost every commandment.
That's not
true.
Actually, if I may jump in real quick on that point specifically, the fact that interpretation is necessary, an essential part of you read something, you interpret it. That is how reading works.
Sure.
Everything is an interpretation. So even if you read the objective law, you will be interpreting it, which makes it then subjective. Because
Yeah.
you can read the words and they can be as clear as day, but just like if we go to Genesis 18 and it says God had to go to Sodom and Gomorrah to find out if the reports he heard was true, a Christian will say, and I'm not sorry if I'm throwing stones at y'all specifically, but they'll say no, it doesn't mean he had to go find out when that's what the text says. So it's even if you
Yeah.
had an objective
So-
statement, someone can still interpret it any way they want. Subjective.
Yeah. Well, I would agree with that. Yeah. And
Look-
but here's the thing though. Hang on, CM. But here's the thing. If I can reply to this, I would like to, not right now, but that would be a good thing to go to, because again, if we're just throwing out verses and statements and just saying, okay, well, this is exactly what it says, I'm like, okay, but again, like if we go to a specific passage and it clearly states this one thing, we can tell if somebody is literally going far left with something, and we can be like, now pump the brakes, let's come back to it. So just because somebody can twist God's words, that doesn't mean that it's not objective.
Exactly. And it's just because somebody can subjectively read something doesn't mean that they're right. Right? Like if I were to say the car is red, 20 people can read that and understand the car is red. When you're talking about God's laws, they're black and white.
But Kenesha, it's really burgundy.
I agree, but they're not black and white. And that's the whole point, is that like
But how is it possible that they're not black and white?
The whole sola scriptura problem of Protestantism points to that, right? Like one of the major arguments that Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox make against Protestant Christians are that they have no basis or unified church to make proper interpretations, like something like the Eucharist, for example. Is it actually the body and blood of Jesus, or is it not, right?
Right, but that's when man takes something and he wants to twist. See, mankind wants to do things all the time, and without even realizing it. Like Hitler said, you say a lie loud enough and long enough, people are going to believe it.
True.
People know this, so there's a lot of control in religion.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk. Who determines the correct interpretation?
God, the Holy Spirit.
That God can. It has to be interpreted by a human reading the text. The text does not have any life apart from the person interpreting it. Even if it's through the Holy Spirit, it still has to be interpreted and made either public to other believers, or it has to be interpreted through the mind of the person reading it.
So if I say real quick, and I'll let you say it, Mr. Hyde, I'll get back to you. I promise.
No,
I saw that. I saw it. I saw it.
Good.
So if let's just say that God says, if you take an innocent life, then you must die yourself. How else would that be interpreted? Pretty easy, right?
What's innocent?
Yeah, that right there opens up a whole
What's
can of
innocent?
worms.
But
But see, this is the frustration. You guys complicate things too much.
What is innocent and what's not?
No, it's because it is complicated. Like, let me give you an example. I think that Jesus absolutely teaches that any sort of violence, even in self-defense, is prohibited. And I would say all of the Christians in the first three centuries pretty much agreed with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you talk to a modern day Protestant, they will say that self-defense is permitted, and I would say that it's not. So right there, we don't have an agreement even on the Sermon on the Mount ethics.
Yeah, so Jesus literally says to his disciples, "Go buy a sword." But anyway, go ahead.
Which I was interpreted totally differently. Which I'll give you the interpretation if you would like.
Okay.
Yeah, no, on that one I was giving you a ding ding. I was agreeing with you. No, but the only thing I wanted to say on that was is it Kenesha
Yeah, it's
I just
Kenesha.
Okay, just making sure I got the name right. It's Prince too small. I can't read that at all. It was going back to the question you asked earlier. That goes back to my contention that morality is subjective. When you asked who gives the ultimate, I think that's an invalid question. I don't think there's a such thing as an ultimate, given the nature of what it is. Once again, if we read the objective, plain, law, someone has to read it and interpret it, and they could do it according to their subjective nature. And that's just what a moral is. It's how we think we should behave towards someone. And there are
So,
scenarios where, okay, I can react this way or I can react this way, and they might both be valid. And no, it's not simple. It is gray. So it's a moral decision, which means it's not a black and white. You could have made a right decision, but you could have made a righter decision. So
Okay,
I
so
but
can't see
what?
how it's
How would?
not subjective.
so real,
Thank
real
you,
quick,
Mr. Hyde.
this. Let me just say this real quick. If I was to tell, like, if I'm cooking on the stove, right, and I got a hot stove, okay, and my daughter comes up beside me and starts to touch it, and I tell her, no, you should not do that. That is not okay. You're going to get burned. Don't do that. Can she just, is she going to be justified by saying, well, I didn't really interpret him telling me I should not do this, or I ought not to do this? Would she be justified in the actions of burning her hand?
Well, the real question is it still objectively true? Because what if you reach and do it and don't follow your own commands? Should she follow what you do or what you say?
Well, according to God, right? Don't do it because of me, because I'm an infallible being. Okay. But again, if God says it, and he's going to do it as well. So he's going to follow his own law. Now, if I tell my daughter, your hand is going to be burned if you touch the stove, that is objective. There is no other way of interpreting that. So
Hey, I gotta go, guys. I'll be back on, okay?
Okay. So if God says, right, don't just go out and just kill somebody just for the the laughs and the ahas, right? Like, don't do that. But if somebody wrongfully kills somebody, then they ought to die as well. That's pretty cut and dry.
Are you giving a hypothetical, or are you saying that's what God says in the New Testament?
Yeah, well, no, that in the Old Testament, he says, don't murder somebody. And if you do, then,
so like Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew is quoting an eye for an eye, right? A tooth for a tooth. So
which is also in Exodus 21,
right? Yeah. Which are actually like, those are actually like literal. If someone does this to you, you can do this to them in retaliation, right? It's not.
Well,
that's why he's taking that, but he's saying the opposite, that no longer do that, right? Like,
well, he's saying eye for eye, tooth for tooth, burn for burn, stripe for stripe, life for life, right?
Right.
So it's basically covering it all. Like if
but I say,
yeah. So if you wrongfully treat somebody, then it will be repaid. That's what God says, and it's pretty cut and dry.
Well, I don't know that Jesus is saying wrongfully. He's just saying if it's done to you, don't do it back. It's nothing to do with wrongfully.
No. He says life for life. So if somebody's life is taken, then their life will be given, basically. So
who is saying that?
That's justifiable. Well, it's
God is saying that in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yes, and Jesus is saying that you, as the follower, are not permitted to take that
because it's not retaliation. And in fact, it's not up to us, because again, if we want to look into the New Testament, we can see what Paul says is in Romans 13. He says that the governing authorities are able to do these things because they are the
the stewardship of God, right?
They're the steward, right?
Yeah. So again, okay, go ahead, Mr. Hyde.
No. I'm sorry. I thought there was a pause. Go ahead.
There was. I'm good. Go ahead. I'm good. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay. Cool. I hate cutting people off because I know that's one of my pet peeves. How do we know which interpretation is the objective moral correctness? Because we've got the Bible, we've got myriad versions of Christianity, we've got myriad religions. How are we saying, okay, I know there's a solid right and wrong, and I know what it is? How did we arrive there?
Well, because
Again, it's pretty plain, cut and dry what God says in His Word, and that's
But
why
we're already assuming what a God and an interpretation. How did we get to that conclusion?
I'm just saying, like, if you look at what the Word of God says, if you look at what the Bible says, okay, and again, if you look at what the law says, pretty cut and dry what is being commanded.
So is
The law of Baal, or the law of Zeus, or the law of Thor, or the law of Marduk?
No, I'm saying, like, again, and again, this this is a whole different discussion, because then we can go into, Jesus claimed to be the one and only God.
Okay.
So if that's true, then Baal and all them don't matter.
Well, if it's true that he claimed it, or if it's true that he is.
both.
Well,
Both.
I can claim I'm the Son of God, Messiah, and that doesn't mean anything. So,
well, again, but again, we can test it.
how?
Because
That's where we're going. How did we arrive at
cool.
God
So-
in the Bible?
Yeah. So what Jesus says in John 14, right? He says, and again, just what me and CM was talking about, the other stream that I did with him, we was talking about the Old Testament prophecies of Jesus. And so we don't necessarily have to get into that tonight, but so when Jesus says in John 14, right, that's a lot, man. That is a lot. I'm telling you what.
Yeah.
That's it. And again, interpretation, right? So, and there's some people who just refuses to see certain things. And so this is what I'm saying. So when Jesus says in John 14, he says, believe that I am in the Father and the Father's in me. And if not just that, believe in the works themselves. So what he's saying here is that you can test his works. All right. And to see if there is something there.
What does that mean?
And put it with his claims.
Well, what does it mean to test his works?
Well, like, again, what he says, I believe it's in Matthew's gospel. But anyway, whenever he says that when you see me casting out demons by the power of the Holy Spirit, then you know that his kingdom has come. And so Jesus plainly says, look, if you see me casting out demons by the Spirit of God, right, then you know that my kingdom has come to you.
Okay, so we're assuming the truth of the narrative.
Well, I mean, we can. I'm just saying, like, there's practical things here that we can look at and we can say, okay, there's certain things that we can test, just like science, right? Like, if there is no moral truth or anything else, then science cannot absolutely be even known at all, right? Like, how can I know anything about gravity or anything else? Because, like, if it's not true, then how am I to know?
But we can measure gravity. We can't measure morality. There's a significant difference.
Well, not necessarily, because again, like, what would call for a better society? Would it be the very clear statements that God makes in His Word, cut and dry, right? Versus my subjective opinion versus your objective opinion. Like, who's to say?
That's the question.
Right.
Because we don't have God's actual words, or we can't actually interpret them.
That's assuming. We can't do that.
We do. We have words, but nobody can agree on their interpretation. Like, let me give you another example. So I think it was
real quick, but that's even assuming that we have the right words.
In 1968, there were a whole group of evangelists and Christians who gathered for an abortion conference, right? And they all came together and discussed whether abortion was theologically acceptable were not. And the conclusion they came to was that, yes, under certain circumstances, they can't say it's not, right? But if you talk to the average evangelical Christian today, they'll say that the New Testament and the Bible is absolutely clear on the fact that God is against abortion. And yet the same people who are New Testament authors, scholars, who wrote for this magazine, Christianity Today, or Weekly, couldn't come to a conclusion, and actually came to the opposite conclusion. And they had several others after, and they just revised them slightly each time, and still came to the conclusion that abortion was unacceptable. So I'm not giving you that to say whether or not God says abortion is acceptable or not, but it's hardly clear whether.
Well, it's not. It's actually, again, it's very cut and dry, because again, if you would you hang on, would you say that a baby is innocent?
Would I say a baby is innocent?
I would.
Okay. So if somebody takes of an innocent life, then they ought to give their life. How is that contradictory? Because that's what God says.
Well, it's not about contradictory. It's once again.
Okay. Yeah.
It's once again arriving at the Bible as being the one, and then arriving at your subset of conclusions for the Bible as being the correct version of that.
I'm going with what CM was just saying. Okay.
Oh,
and that is
right,
that
but
is
you realize that many of those theologians didn't even consider them babies at that point. So you're already
again,
in
like
terms that they didn't even consider to be true. And that's the whole.
Okay, but that's again, that's opinion. So
it was their opinion. Absolutely.
Okay, but that's the thing. So what science says, okay, is objective. Okay, it is true. All right, it has been studied on. It is true that the moment of conception, that baby is a human baby. The moment of conception, that is a scientific fact. So I don't care what no theologian says. If they go against that, then they're just naive. They're just ignorant.
So you're saying then they're going against the clear word of God.
They're going against clear science and that full matter. Like it doesn't matter. Like they're going against
the word
both
of God or science.
Both.
And science,
because the word of God goes with
opinion.
Science.
Science is not a thing. It's just a group of. Science is a study that consists of.
So how do you know anything at all, man?
Called scientists.
How do you test anything? How do you know anything?
Because
at all?
Scientists test. That's what they do. They repeatedly test and evaluate.
To come to what?
It's like those theologians would be doing, right?
Yeah. So what do they do to test?
As their education improves and as their knowledge improves, they re-meet again and they come again and they vote and they come to different conclusions. They change their mind. Some probably changed their mind and said, you know what? I think it is wrong for any Christian to have an abortion, right? And then others probably changed their mind the opposite way and said, you know what?
I'm saying that the within the moment of conception, that baby is a human baby.
My point is that none of them could pick a verse from the New Testament or Old Testament. If they could, they would have done that, right? So there was no objective standard that was clearly stated in the New Testament or Old Testament. It had to be whatever verses you thought best fit case, because there are no clear verses. If there were, it would be
in Proverbs it says that there are 7 things that God hates. Okay, and one of those things is taking of innocent life. So that's pretty cut and dry there. So what is an innocent life? Again, you've already said that a baby is innocent life. And if it has scientifically proven, all right, that baby from the moment, and just hear me out, from the moment of conception is a child, that is a human baby. All right. So if you take of that innocence, then you are committing a crime. And then you ought to be punished in a certain way. So who's to say in what way that person's to be punished? Do you believe in justice?
So several assumptions you're putting right there. First, again, you're assuming that those theologians would have called it a baby. Second, you're assuming they all would have said babies were innocent, because that's debatable theologically, right? If everyone's born with original sin, then how are you innocent?
So again, that baby has not committed anything, because that baby
They're
cannot
sinful, aren't they? Don't they have the nature of sin?
Yeah, when they grow up and they have no way.
sin. They're
They
born
have
without sin.
inherited. They have inherited the nature of sinning.
So they
once
have
they
sin,
become,
then, right?
whenever they are able to, yes.
So,
but again, my baby
it's
in
not
there,
clear
my 2
theologically whether a
my
baby
2-month-old
is innocent.
baby in there, my 2-month-old baby in there, okay,
Right.
cannot think on their own. They have to literally rely on me and her mother. So again, that that doesn't follow.
Right, but if
So
you believe
that
that
baby is
all
innocent.
humans inherit a sin nature, it has nothing to do with their actions.
Yeah,
or
the
their
nature
thoughts.
of it, right? So whenever, all right, so let's say that the nature of somebody of a bunny rabbit, right? Let's just say the nature of a bunny rabbit, okay, is to eat a carrot. Let's just say, right? Just for sake of argument. But yet, whenever that baby rabbit is not old enough to eat that carrot, right? It's only able to do that thing that the nature calls for when it's able to do so.
Right. So
the
what
nature
age?
of that baby,
What age is a baby no longer
when they are
not
able to
sinful?
when they are able to do certain things that they are able to do.
Well, all
So-
babies develop on different timelines. So some babies can walk at a certain age where others can't. Some babies can talk, right?
Yeah,
When
and
others
they
can't.
have to be taught, right, how to do certain things.
So what age then is there an objectively true age that a baby would be?
Again, like that would have to go with what God says and what God
does God say anything about that?
Well, he says again that the nature of all mankind, right, is a sinful nature. Okay. So what I'm saying here is that whenever that baby is old enough and there is no objective number, so that is to answer your
So
claim.
it's
That is to answer
subjective.
your question. Yeah, but again, that doesn't even apply to what we're talking about at all, because again, if I tell that baby, hey, you can't do this certain thing according to what God says, and then that baby does it, then that baby that child has committed sin, because I don't believe a baby has that knowledge to even make that sort of decision in its own right. So again, there is no objective age limit, but again, we can test all things. We can come to certain conclusions. So okay.
I guess let me ask you, can you tell me something that in modern culture is highly contested, either politically or just philosophically, that can be objectively agreed upon, and that the New Testament or Old Testament offers a stone cold objective standard that isn't debated amongst every believer that reads it?
Yeah,
because
real
I
quick.
can't think of one issue in modern society that isn't debated amongst Christians where on both sides Christians have different opinions on.
Well, that would be again, that would be because of, you know, certain things, like again the sinful nature of humans, right? So the
natural thing for Christians to do is to go against what they morally ought not to do.
So your claim is that God makes it clear, but just no one can interpret it correctly.
Well, I think it goes deeper, because I think that there's hardening of hearts and everything else. I think that, but see, that's the thing. Like, me as a Christian have the spiritual realm when others don't. So I can say that there is a spiritual hardening of hearts that would allow certain people not to see certain things.
Right. So I'll give you, there's a spiritual hardening of hearts.
Okay.
Does that help us to
it does,
objectively determine?
Because of a spiritual hardening of heart, right? That means that they don't want to see the truth. So if they don't want to see the truth, then they're not going to look at it. They're going to try to point into a different direction.
Well, like,
right?
Let's say you think that capital punishment or the death penalty is permissible by a Christian to carry out, and I say it's not, and I accuse you of not having the Holy Spirit, right? Or you have a hardened heart, and you say the opposite to me. How do we determine who's correct?
So again, if God says don't take of an innocent life, and then he also says if you do that, then you are to give up your own life. So that's pretty, again, it's pretty cut and dry. So that's how we would acknowledge.
So you're saying any Christian who carries out the death penalty gives up their own life?
I think when it comes to how God structured it, yes, which would be in Romans 13.
Okay. So like if you work for the state and you execute a criminal, that you give up your life to?
It would be like a governing thing, right? So if a bunch of people got together and we all came to the conclusion, hey, this person murdered and they deserve the death penalty, okay, then yes, that death penalty needs to be executed, unless they come to the true God and they repent.
It's subjective.
No, it's not subjective.
If everyone agrees.
So we test.
That was definitely subjective.
So we test the evidence and we go with what God says.
So wait, then what does God say? That's what I'm saying. What does God say?
I've already told you several times. He says that the taking of innocent life is, like, he hates that. The taking of innocent life.
But they're not. They're a criminal. They've been tried in a court, and then we've
so again, that is right. That's the thing. So again,
is that okay for a Christian to do?
Life for life. What I'm saying is that life for life. What God says is that life ought to be taken.
So a Christian then
that's not
can
subjective. That's objective.
Because I would say Jesus says absolutely, categorically not. You cannot.
Okay, Jesus morally speaks, or not morally, sorry. Jesus more speaks upon spiritual rather than physical.
So it doesn't apply for real life.
So actually the New Testament, the New Testament would actually affirm the death penalty. And I can show you this, but we don't have time for that. We can talk about that.
Can you show me that?
Well, it would be in Acts, right? In Acts, Paul is against the council, right? And so he tells the Jewish council, he says, look, if you find or have found any kind of wrongdoing that deserves the death penalty, then I'm okay with that. Like I do not try to escape death.
Well, Christians openly were willing to be martyrs.
Sure. But again, according to the law. So what I'm saying is like he was telling the Jewish that had the law. The Jewish
weren't Christians, they were Jews.
Okay, but they have the same law that we do, obviously.
Not as Christians.
Yeah, as Christians.
Are they under the law of Christ?
Yeah.
They're under the New Testament law.
We are to uphold the law, yes. We are not under it because the law.
So Paul was thinking. So Paul said that to them, expecting them to uphold the laws of Jesus.
Yeah, well, Jesus and the Old Testament.
Then he wouldn't have been executed. Then
well, Jesus and the Old Testament God is the same God. So Jesus made those laws.
So they were Jews who were under the Torah, right?
Mm-hmm.
Under the Mosaic law.
Yes.
Who thought it's fine to put to death some. I'm not saying they did it easily, but it was within their rights to put to death someone who violated the Mosaic law, right?
Mhm.
And I would argue
So
Jesus says you cannot, as a Christian, put to death somebody who violates the Mosaic law. It's not your place to do it. Vengeance is the Lord. It's God's prerogative.
Okay, again, we've already covered that, and I've already explained that. Okay, so that's talking more about the heart of Christians rather than like
So
again.
not in practicality.
If somebody comes in and murders a loved one of mine, okay,
Right.
I cannot just go and murder that person because that's God's job. That's God's moral code.
Right. That's
So he
Jesus' command, right?
Yeah. So what would happen is that person will be tried.
Right.
And then if that person is tried and he is guilty of that crime, then he would be put to death under the governing authority. Yeah. So,
right.
So again,
and likewise, if your life was in threat, it wouldn't be your prerogative to counter, right, through violence.
Yeah. So if somebody comes to me and starts, trying to do all kinds of stuff in my house, right? That is my home. I have the right to defend. And so that's not vengeance. That would be more like, you're coming into my house. I have the right to defend. I have the right to defend myself.
To killing somebody?
Yeah. If it came to that.
See, I would say Jesus categorically says you don't.
By how?
The whole eye for an eye, turn the other cheek, love your enemies is completely.
Yeah, so that person that person is holding a gun, having every intent to kill me and my family.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's wrong that I am to shoot that person?
I don't, but I'm not a Christian. See that?
Okay,
that's the problem.
But see, that's the problem with your the way that you're thinking.
No, it's New Testament ethics. It's what Jesus preached. It's why it's difficult to actually follow Jesus's commands. It's because Christians don't actually follow Jesus's commands, and I know that's kind of a hard thing to take.
No, I mean,
but if you study the early church, all the early church taught that you were not to take up the sword. You were not to.
All the early church.
All of it. You can't find one writing up to the time of. I will give you a homework assignment. Find me one writing up until the time of Augustine that says that you can pick up the sword or that you can even participate in military.
Mm-hmm.
You can't.
Which would be the same thing.
In fact, you weren't even allowed to take communion if you were part of the military in the early church.
Yeah.
You were banned. Certain professions weren't even allowed to. So that was early Christian ethics that you did have to. In fact, over and over again, the early church fathers say that they actually spread Christianity through bloodshed, through their own bloodshed, through dying and.
So is early church infallible?
I don't know. It's just how they all interpreted Jesus's ethics.
Well, I think all is a stretch, and I really want you to show me.
Well, find a writing.
Every single one. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to defend what the Bible says, not what early church fathers.
And that's what the Bible says. That's why they're getting that.
And I've already explained that that's the wrong kind of way of looking at it.
So you're here to defend what the Bible says, which is assuming the conclusion. That goes back to
is against what
the title of what we're saying. No God, no morality. Honestly, I've heard nothing but assumptions and declarations. This is the right morality. This is the right morality.
And if you're, that's all I've been doing is answering his questions.
Mitch, you're
but in the process of answering the questions, the only thing offered.
Talking, so pick one. Who's going to talk?
Well, it's like in the course of answering the questions, it's been stated your interpretation is wrong. You're spiritually hardened. It's going back to what God says, which is only assuming the conclusion, no God morality. I haven't, I think I can definitionally support that we have morality, because morality is a system of how we think we should treat each other. Thinking is
Objectively,
in the
yeah.
definition, which is subjective, and we have those systems. So by definition, we have morality without God.
So if okay, let me just paint this picture for you. Okay, so let's say that in the state of Florida and the state of Georgia, they can have two separate laws. So if the state of Florida if somebody, okay, let's say the state of Florida says that it's okay to murder. All right, the state of Georgia says no, that you cannot murder anybody. Okay, that's subjective. But here's the thing: what if they do say that? All right, now, what if somebody from Florida comes up to Georgia and starts murdering people in Georgia? Well, that's okay in Florida. So how does he be how is there justice for people that were
Well,
murdered?
wherever you
Murder is
are,
by
you abide by the.
definition.
All right, again, one. So who wants to take it?
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Head.
Go for it, dude. Go for it.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Murder is by definition an unjustified killing. Just using the term murder by definition is unjustified.
Yeah.
That's just a legal term.
Okay, so again,
Killing is a question. And that's different in states. You're right. Like if someone breaks in your house, depending on what state you live in, there might be different laws depending on how far you can go to protect your property. Or yep.
So the point being is that, again, how is there, because the Florida guy said, okay, my state says it's okay. So he goes and just upright murders people in Georgia. So how is there justice for the people in Georgia?
But the point
By
being
what
made,
standard is he judged?
well, in that context, I would think, wherever you are, whatever perimeters you're within, you're under that law, because those laws are subjective. That's the way the United States is set up. Florida can have its, Georgia can have it. So if you're in Georgia and you do something dumb in Georgia, you get Georgia penalties. But that's still going back to that's just an example. That's just an example. By definition, we still have a system of behavior. That's what morality is. So regardless of who's right, who's wrong, what Florida, what Georgia says, they both have standards of conduct, and that's without God.
Okay,
So
but
by
there
definition,
is
we
no
have it.
There is no justice for those people that were murdered.
That's not talking about whether there is or isn't morality. That's talking about whether there is or is not justice under a system of morality.
So that still runs into morality, though. So again, if somebody comes and like say that the Florida guy doesn't know about the laws of Georgia, he hasn't heard about it, he hasn't, and so the point here is that he does something that they don't agree with, but his state agrees with it. So by what standard? He's under both laws now.
No, he's not.
He must answer to both laws now.
No, that never happened.
Because
if he lives
okay
in Florida, he's
citizen of
under
Florida.
Florida state laws.
But if he
Yeah, so
breaks the law in
he's a
Georgia,
citizen of
he's
Florida.
under Georgia's
Right.
penal system.
Okay, but
They
he's still a
they
citizen
try
of
you in
Florida.
Georgia because you committed a crime there.
Yeah, so he's still a citizen of Florida, though.
But
Florida-
that doesn't matter. You committed a crime in Georgia. If I go
Yeah.
to Russia and I commit a crime in Russia, they're going to have me in Russian prison. We know that from that sports girl from a couple years ago. She was over in Russia. They didn't send her back to the United States for processing. You break a law on someone else's land,
Sure.
you're under theirs. But
Sure.
the fact is, in Russia, in Florida, in Georgia, they all have those systems of behavior, which is morality by definition. So regardless of the consequences, regardless of whose jurisdiction they fall under, there is that system of morality that exists without a God. So there is morality without God. It may not be the morality you agree with, but it is a system of behavior.
Well, I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to be agreed upon, and that's in your standard. It does not have to be agreed upon.
No, it's just a system of morality.
That I see is that, again, what is the just penalty for those certain things? And if
if this Florida man did not know the right way of doing things in Georgia, then again, that doesn't, because he was told it was okay.
But we're still talking about the reality of the code. You're acknowledging that there is a code that he was ignorant of. So by acknowledging there was a code, you are acknowledging the existence of a morality. Then that's the only contention I'm making.
My point would be appealing to the Old and New Testament would not solve it.
Okay.
If Florida or Georgia or whatever state we're talking about said, you know what, the man's got a point. Maybe our laws are unjust. Let's turn open the New Testament and Old Testament to determine. They would have more problems trying to interpret. Because again, if there is an objective standard, if God is declaring an objective standard, no one has been able to figure it out. That's my point.
So here's the thing, right? So the Old Testament, I don't follow that, because the Old Testament, again, if you take an innocent life, okay, and you already said that morality that like exists, right? So if morality exists, then there is a right and wrong, and there is innocent and not innocent. Okay, so that's just what it is. So
important caveat. I'm sorry. Important caveat on that. There is right and wrong under each respective moral system. In the cases of Georgia, Florida, and Russia, the same action could be right and wrong in each of those because you're dealing with different moral standards. That's the only caveat. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so what I'm saying here is that the subjectivity, okay, that there is no ultimate ought or anything like that when it comes to y'all's morality, ethics, whatever you want to call it. So in y'all's worldview, okay, and so when it comes to what God says, okay, again, pretty cut and dry. Let me just repeat it. It says that if you take up an innocent life, then you you give up your right to live, basically. Okay, so that's pretty cut and dry. Okay, that is not different opinions, different any of that. It clearly says. Now, there are people who look at it in a certain way and says, well, that's not what he actually means. But I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. Again, if you take up an innocent life, then you are to be given, your life is to be given in return. That's pretty clear. So why wouldn't I want something that's pretty clear rather than just the subjectivity of everybody else's opinion?
But see, I think that's the issue. You're saying this is clear. First of all, what does innocent mean? Lawyers would debate that for months.
Well, lawyers get paid to lie. So I'm not even looking at
it. It doesn't matter. That's what it is. You can essentially say we're all lawyers whenever we read that verse, because unless someone just says, you know what, Mitch, you decide then what innocent means, you're going to have everyone debate it, right? And they're all going to come to different conclusions what the word innocent means, because some are going to bring theological meanings of innocent in, some are going to bring purely, secular legal terms of innocent. And what I'm saying is it's not a cut and dry statement, and then even getting past innocent, now we've got, again, the Old and New Testament dichotomy of who's going to take that life in payment.
I've already told you, but by what God's law says, who is able to take that life. But let's just get to this real quick. Okay. So what you said before, hopefully maybe you can clear it up. Correct me if I'm wrong. But you said that by definition, murder is wrong, right?
The term murder by definition is, and yes, just using that term implies that it's a illegitimate or unlawful killing. Okay.
So if that's the case, then that would make you not innocent, correct? That would make you guilty?
If you're a murderer, if you are technically a murderer, if you're legally, then you killed unjustly, yes.
Okay. So again, if
But
the Bible
that's the
says
whole
that if you
point.
murder somebody, then you give up your life to live. Plainly, there's no other way of looking at it. That one verse, plain. And so, if that is objective, that is something that is not up for debate.
All right. So then,
if you
who
murder,
takes my life? Who takes my life?
so again, within the structure of what God says, okay, it's the government, it's the governing authorities. Romans 13.
Okay.
So they
What if the
hold
government?
God's
What if
judgment.
it's an entirely Christian nation and the government authorities are all Christians?
Well, then
Then they
you should
shouldn't have
get
murdered.
you should get the same conclusion then.
So that a Christian has to murder or kill me, and
Well, it would be
even
again,
though that's the vengeance is the Lord's, right?
again,
'Cause
vengeance.
that's objectively true.
So we keep going around the stuff that's already been covered. But again,
no, what you're
We
doing
keep
is
getting into the
thinking I
consequences.
agree. You think I agree with what you're saying, and I absolutely disagree.
I know you don't agree with it. That's the problem.
Christians
we
cannot.
That's the whole
kill.
point of our
That's
discussion.
the
is that
whole
you don't
point.
agree.
It
Yeah.
sounds like we keep getting into consequences rather than morality and justice. But yeah, those things
Because
are
justice
separate.
is
The existence
justice is the
when
consequence of that
yeah,
wrong.
exactly. So that comes after and it seems like a lot of this has been about the consequences, not about what we're basing the consequences on, which is morality, which is the basis of the topic, which I think I've established is subjective by definition.
Okay, so I just asked him if murder is objectively wrong, and he said yes. So again, it's not just the consequence. It's the whole point of pointing out what morality is to point out what is right and what's wrong.
So murder is a legal term. It's a legal definition created by humans, right? Humans came up with the term murder to define an unlawful killing. So if I go on trial for killing someone, until I'm found guilty of some form of murder, first degree murder, second degree murder, I have at that point killed someone, right? Or maybe not even killed someone. It's to be determined whether I've even killed someone. So at the very end, if I'm found guilty, right, in a court of law, you can legally say I committed murder, right? I mean, by a legal definition, by a court found me guilty.
Yeah.
Of committing
so
murder,
again, that
right?
gets into another part of God's law is what says 2 or 3 witnesses by the witness of 2 or 3 persons, right? But then there's other laws that go into you cannot bear false witness.
But many states don't have the death penalty, so many states disagree
but I don't.
with God.
But that's the problem here. That's the problem that's the problem in y'all's worldview is that there is no objective stuff. So there is no morality.
And many Christians disagree that anybody should be killed.
So there is no way for that person to be justified in that murder.
Pope Francis was completely against any killing or any sort of.
So if that person was murdered, then there's no justice for that person via the opinions of others.
So are we calling the consequences part of morality? Because it sounds like we're talking about consequences again, not morality.
Well, again, the consequence to the crime, okay, and that's how we get to morality is to know what is that crime. Right,
but not the consequence. You don't have to know the consequence to know it's wrong.
All right. So all I'm saying is that within God's law, you get the consequence with the moral ought. So that's what I'm saying. So if I'm here to defend the Bible, I must do that.
Well,
all right.
Going back, I don't even accept that murder is objectively wrong. I think
so. You two disagree.
He might have been. I think. See him correct me. I think you may have been couching it strictly in the legal sense.
Yes.
I don't know if you agree with me on lack of saying that murder is not objectively wrong. I don't want to put you in that. But I don't think, because I maintain that morality is subjective.
Murder is a legal term. So my only point is, if you label it murder and not killing, you are saying it is violating some sort of
morality.
Well, part of the definition
violating
of
some
murder
sort of
is
law.
this is
It's an
unlawful. Yeah,
Right,
it's
it's a
part of the
law.
definition is it's unlawful. So that
Which
It was
in that
not in
context,
your right to do so.
right?
That's
But
morality.
and that's a law built on a moral, but the overall moral principle is we collectively decided we don't like being murdered. We don't want our
Right.
people being murdered. I don't want my stuff being stolen. Don't steal my stuff. And if you do it, we're going to impose consequences. That is a collective thing.
Other
And
countries
that's,
and other countries and other governments don't agree with you.
well, I mean, I think we can say from the
That's
bigger
why we
ticket
have war.
items. Well, from the bigger ticket items, like murder and stealing, that's why we start with those. There's pretty much unanimous agreement. We don't dig on that stuff as a species. As we get more and more into the milieu of morality and the finer points, yeah, we're going to differ. That's cultural and religious and everything else. But
That's why it's flawed, in my opinion.
huh?
That's why it's flawed, in my opinion, because it can change tomorrow.
But then once again, how did we arrive at what the correct conclusion is? It comes back to all I'm seeing is
Based on feelings.
assumptions and declarations,
It's based on feelings.
which is subjective.
Exactly. My point.
So you're saying
Exactly my
Christian interpretations of the New Testament are based on feelings?
That's not what I said.
That's what I heard. That is what I heard.
That's what you heard?
Yeah.
You heard me-
Please rephrase
you
that
heard me
because that
say
is what I
that
took
you-
from it.
You heard. I'm talking about yours.
Oh.
Yours is.
How is yours not?
Yeah.
That would be
Well,
the
it's because
question.
mine is clearly stated.
Where?
By your assumption.
already
By your
told you.
assumption. By your
because
assumption.
because
By my
I can
assumption.
find a Christian within 2 seconds to say the opposite.
So I'm just going to say this again. Okay, this is, I don't know how many times I've said it already, but let's just say again, right? If you murder, legal term, morality, all right? If you murder somebody, then you give yourself up. That's it. There is no other way of looking at that.
Under
so-
a specific standard of morality,
Right,
the
or
one that
law.
you think is correct. How did you arrive at that conclusion?
Yeah, because
Yeah, okay. Let me ask it like this, if I may. No God, no morality. Your statement, correct?
Mhm.
Prove it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Prove it.
that's why we're discussing. I'm
Well-
trying to prove that there is objective morality
And how are we doing that?
within God's law, what is written.
How did you arrive at the objective morality being God's law? That's my question again. Kind
Because
of like you're repeating.
because Jesus historically was a man, and he historically died by crucifixion, and he did raise from the dead, and he claimed to be God. So
I
if
don't
that's the
agree.
case, well, that's fine. And
Well,
that's
so
why
you haven't proven your statement. That's the only thing I'm
That-
saying.
I'm trying to. So what I'm saying here is that if Jesus rose from the dead and he claimed to be God, okay, so that means that he is God. And if that is true, then the Old Testament God is also true, because they're the same person, or they're the same God. So what I'm saying here is that if his claims are true and he actually did this, he rose from the dead, that's his claim. All right. So if that's true, then we go back and we say, okay, well, this stuff must be true because that was written down by God.
Even if I granted you every single thing you just said, it would not solve your problem one bit about finding what is objectively true.
So
Or being
even if I
able to
plainly read
determine
the
what is
text, it would.
objectively true.
So even if I read the text very plainly, it wouldn't be true.
Well,
I
what I
could
get from
grant
that
you
is
Jesus rose. I could grant you Jesus is part of the Trinity. I could grant you all those things and still say, I still don't know what God's objective truth is on any
So
matter.
again, if I read it plainly and it plainly says,
But everybody reads it plainly. That's the point.
But then
Everybody
that goes
thinks
into
they read it plainly.
and every
That's why-
reading is
that's
an
what
interpretation.
hermeneutics is.
But
Do you know the study of hermeneutics? There are
Yeah.
books after books written on how to interpret the New Testament and
Yeah.
Old Testament, and it goes from literal to figurative to figuring out what genre it is to right. It is so complicated that scholars who spend their entire life can't come to agreements about what the text is actually saying, and let alone we have translations from the original Greek and Hebrew, right? So we really have a hard task if anybody is trying to come to definitive conclusion on what's being said. And the fact is, it hasn't happened yet. Nobody can agree. And that's the problem. That's why there's millions of different Christians claiming different things. And I'm not blaming the Christians. I'm just saying it's the reality of the situation. It's why, again, Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox cling to the fact that they have apostolic succession and they were passed on orally traditions that aren't, it's just why the arguments continue on and on, because the text is not clear in any.
Well, I mean, the text not being clear about like certain things that Catholics believe that Protestants don't. The differences between Protestants
moral issues, just ethical moral issues. It's not clear.
Okay.
And then you have to complicate it. We're talking about Christians believe, most that they're in a new covenant, that a lot of the Old Testament laws no longer apply. And you just add even another layer on that even further complicates it, right?
Yeah. Well, because the Bible explains those certain things. And
but
this
you're
goes
saying
into the hard
it
parts and
explains
everything
them.
else.
Whose interpretation are we taking?
Well, again, that's what I'm saying. So again, just the same conversation that I had with Brett earlier. Okay, he's getting his sources from other places, not from what the Bible says. So certain people get it from other people who just want to distort the gospel, and they've plainly said so.
And if what he says is true, Jude was also reading those other sources. Right,
which is
like First Enoch, and so you're also assuming that what you think is scripture was considered scripture then, right? So New Testament scholars think that the scriptures have gone through numerous revisions and altercations, and there's this guy Marcion that most Christians don't even know who he is, right? It was supposed to be the one who compiled the first New Testament. And it's endless, the amount of problems that you would have if you were trying to sort out what is actually the text that's authoritative and beyond just, and I'm not even going into that. I'm just saying, okay, I'll grant you this text is the authoritative text. I'm not even going into that we don't have the authoritative text. I'm saying, okay, let's assume what we have is the text, right? Tell me what the objective standards are.
Well, I've already, Well, for sure. It does. And that's fine. And I will grant you, and not just hypothetically, I will actually grant you that it is complicated. Some of it is. Again, like the distinguishes between, or the differences between like Protestant and Catholic, right? There are certain things that is like, what the heck? what the heck is this? But again, like when we, and real quick before I continue, and we're about to have to wrap up, but there's people in the chat that keep saying link, please. But we're not, I should have said this before, but these are the last two. We're not going any further than this. Just join me my next stream, and we'll just continue on. Okay. Just keep everything, because we can just all keep talking, because as soon as we all stop talking, all things go to crap. All things go to crap. Okay. So, and I'm sure that y'all would agree with that. I'm sure that y'all agree with that we all need to just continue talking and just, try to make sense of things. But anyway, what I would say, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I enjoy the heck out of these. That's all.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, that's why I do it, man. That's why I do it. So what I'm saying here is like, there's a lot of stuff to unpack with that. There's so much to unpack with that. That I personally don't have an answer for, because I have not done my personal studies on it. But what really comes down to it, okay, is that again, if we read that, what it says, okay, and we say, how else can this be interpreted? And then, you're like, well, again, like, let's say that if you murder somebody, then it says that you are to be put to death. And so how else could that be interpreted?
I'm sorry, you kind of broke up a little bit.
That's fine. So again, like if we go into, and I can pull it up, but it's a very short verse. It just says, and where I've been camping out. Okay. It says, if you murder somebody, all right, then you are to be put to death. All right. How else would that be interpreted in your head when you read that verse?
It's like I said, it first has to, first of all, you would have to establish, is it murder?
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, you've had to establish who is going to carry out the justice.
Okay.
There's a myriad of questions that would come to it.
But what I'm saying here is that one command clear? Just the command.
I'd say that is straightforward. Me personally, I wouldn't know how else to interpret that, but
people do.
Exactly. Like the Sodom and Gomorrah example I gave earlier. God had to go find out. Well, no, it didn't mean he had to go find out. It just says that. So you can literally say X says not X, and that's what humans do. That's what makes this whole thing subjective.
Right. Well, but here's the thing, though. What I'm saying here is that, y'all keep bringing up, well, there's different interpretations. What I'm trying to show you is that just because somebody can literally take something straight out of what the Bible clearly says and twist it into their own subjective idea, that does not mean that it's not an objective truth, what God says.
Are you in Exodus? What are you quoting from?
Okay, let me just pull it up.
Just so I can...
Yeah, that's fine. Let me see.
Well, while you're pulling that up, I'd go ahead and say, but the same thing, it doesn't work both ways in a real conversation. They get to say, the Christians, from what I've experienced, that X, it says X, but it means not X. But you're telling me your interpretation means there's no other way. This is subjectivity.
No. But what I'm trying to tell you is that even you said that this is pretty cut and dry. It's pretty clear.
Yeah, my subjective opinion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, though. If you say that, I mean, this is pretty cut and dry. Okay. If this is true, then, hang on. I'm trying to read this and do the other stuff at the same time. Just give me one.
Sorry, I derailed. I didn't mean to. I thought I'd make a quick comment.
No, you good.
But what I'm saying here is like, okay, I got the verse, and I know it's verse 12 right here. All right. So my point here is that, let's say, whoever strikes a man so that he dies, right, shall be put to death. So if he kills somebody, he is to be put to death. So, and then it goes into the next line where it talks about accidental, right? In verse 13. But if he did not lie in wait to kill him, like he did not ponder, he did not, try to, wait for him, right? And God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to flee. So there's two different punishments here. So
there's accidental.
Right. So there's a you did this on purpose, but then there's another one where you did not.
So what I'm saying here is that
This is pretty cut and dry, and if it is, and you even, you know, what you said, Mr. Hyde, what you said is that this is pretty cut and dry, right? In your subjective opinion, that's fine. But this is pretty cut and dry, right? And you couldn't say or see how anybody could take this out of context or twist it in any way. Okay. And so I would agree with you with that because it's very cut and dry. So, you know, saying that there's other people, this is all I'm saying, that saying that there is other people out there that will twist this in a way where it's almost impossible to do so.
So I'm gonna twist it right away.
Okay.
When you say whoever strikes a man so that he dies shall be put to death, does that apply to self-defense?
Well, no, because it's not that this is on the basis of murder.
If he kill, if I strike you and you die,
Mhm.
but I'm doing it because I'm defending myself or I'm retaliating, does that hold the same penalty?
No, because it doesn't say in retaliation or, you know, in order
Right,
to
it
defend
doesn't
yourself.
say.
It's just saying if you strike, but then it goes into the next verse. If you do not, you know, lie in wait for this, and the way that that's stated is that you did not just sit there and wait on them to come in. So you're not like plotting, right, to kill this person.
Right.
So,
I agree the verse should be taken as in like you're the aggressor and
right. And there's other ones in there. We're just talking about this one, but there's other ones in there about that. Okay. But what I'm saying here is that, okay. Anyway, it says right here, verse 14, but if a man willfully attacks another to kill him by cunning, right? You shall take him from my altar and he may die, that he may die or shall die. And these three verses are pretty much intertwined, talking about the same thing.
And then the verse underneath, do you take that as objectively true?
Yeah, whoever strikes his mother and his father and mother shall be put to death. So it's in the same striking, so that
would be true also.
It's pretty harmful, yeah.
So you think you would agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that just because, sorry. So what I'm saying here, my whole argument here, okay, is that if that's pretty, you know, it's literally right there. Okay. It's pretty hard to, like, it's a task to take that and twist it. Okay. That's my whole thing. That right there is pretty cut and dry. And if it is, then yes, you can get, again, this is just a little bit of it, but you can get a thriving society with this objectivity. That's my argument. So if it's cut and dry, it's not just opinion. It's not up to opinion. It's not up for debate. It literally says if you kill somebody, then you will be put to death. It's clear. So that's not my subjective opinion.
Right. I mean, you could construct a society that just says whoever strikes someone is put to death.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever a child strikes their parents, they're put to death. You could construct a society
right
like that.
But
I highly doubt that if you had any functioning humans, that you would have just complacent agreement on that.
Right. But what I'm saying here again is like, you know, if that is the statement that God puts down, okay, it's written, right? It's there.
Right.
I would say that if we were to have, you know, a group of people, right, a nation or even a world with these kind of laws, I think we would have a thriving nation or group or whatever.
Because one of the thing I mentioned is, okay, so it says whoever strikes another should be put to death.
Right.
So then you turn to Bob and say, okay, Bob, carry it out. It doesn't say I'm supposed to, right? Bob says it doesn't say I'm supposed to carry this out. Get Stan to do it. All right,
Well, again,
Stan, go ahead, do it. Right now, we've already opened up a whole bigger problem because it doesn't define who's supposed to carry it out.
well, again, like I said before, like I said while I was reading it, I said this is just one command. We literally have an entire law to go off of, so we can get into those as well. But what I'm saying here is that there are, and I've already told you, it's Romans 13. I've already told you that the governing authorities, what I'm telling you is like the believers that have this in front of them, have the Bible to go off of, have the Word of God to go off of. They read that and they say, okay, we're going to get all together and we're going to come to a conclusion. Hey, this person did in fact murder this other person, so we are to take of his life.
But what if I point to the fact that the Israelites lived under a theocracy and Romans 13 was written under the Roman government?
It was
entirely two different forms.
Yeah, it was. But again,
like separated by hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah. And
I wouldn't even see how that's relevant. In defense of what Mitch is saying, it sounds like in Romans 13, yes, murder is wrong. We've established that for the sake of. But in Romans 13, this group of people in the space of government, Christian or not, have been given the authority to carry out this literal execution. So it shouldn't matter if they're Christians. Under this theology, it has been authorized to carry out that consequence. So I don't have a problem with that interpretation at all.
But many of the New Old Testament scriptures talk about the townspeople actually being part of the stoning, and
that would
they're not governing
authorities. That would be pretty much the same thing. So it would be like a cultural thing.
That would be the authorization given to carry out the execution, not permission for anybody to go out there willy-nilly. In either scenario, they've been given this portion.
That's the vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. It's not up to me to do it. I have to do it within the structure of what God gave us. So the vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I cannot go out there and carry that out myself because that would be murder. To me, like that would be sin for me because I would be going against what God's law says. So then I would put them against the government authorities, and then a whole society would be able to execute judgment. So that's the whole setup of God's law is that, hey, this is wrong. This is the consequence to it. That's how you get objective justice and everything else. So that's my whole thing is that, it has to be done that way. And in my argument, I think that's the only way to get to a thriving society rather than just be like, just willy-nilly. Yeah, Bob over there says it's okay, but Susie over here says it's not. So, we just kind of got to be in a jungle here.
But what makes you think that laws are willy-nilly? That's
well, it is because
here's establishing laws.
But here's the thing. Different states do certain things to have certain laws. I get that.
Right. There's state laws. There's also federal laws.
Right. But what I'm saying here is that the whole willy-nilly thing, right? Like my opinion goes against your opinion. Like it ultimately doesn't matter. That's what I'm saying. So Georgia's law system butt heads with other law systems in other states. There is no objectivity. So that's all I'm saying is that it's just kind of like just tossed up in the air. Like who knows and who says? That's my point. So it doesn't really ultimately matter. Nobody really gets ultimately justice for anything because it's just a bunch of, subjectivity being tossed around. And that's pretty much what we live by.
Hey, real quick. I know, Mitch, you said you were going to wrap up earlier. I gotta start wrapping up my day. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to do this again. See ya.
Sure.
Have a good one.
And then, hey, thank you for showing up, bro. This has been a great conversation. God bless you, and I'll see you hopefully in the next stream. That'd be great.
Cool beans, man. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
Yes, sir. So yeah, I think that we can.
I think we could wrap it up and bring it again another day.
Absolutely.
Hey, look, I really appreciate it, dude, because like, us getting into this is so important for us to talk this thing out, man. And I really appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you too. It's good to have these discussions.
Sure.
And actually, there's no end to it, which is that's
Unfortunately,
funny.
yeah. Unfortunately,
I've had discussions that are like 4 hours, and my wife will be like, "You must have talked about everything." No, actually, we
Just
never
one
even
subject.
talked about the subject that we were initially.
right.
Yeah, she can't like understand that. She thinks, like you would, if you talked that long, you would cover every single. No,
Nah, absolutely
not even close.
No,
It's like,
absolutely
there's
not.
so
We
many.
could talk for
You
eternity.
could talk. Oh, you could. You could talk
Yeah.
like months straight and not.
Yeah.
And come away and say I didn't say that. I forgot to bring up that.
Right.
Yeah,
And I know as soon as I get off this stream, I'm going to be like, man, I wish I would have brought this up.
Yeah. But then the
Well,
more
hey-
you do it, the more better chance
Sure.
you'll bring it up at some point, and yeah.
And that's why
I
I say
appreciate it.
Oh yeah, man. And that's why I say we got to keep talking, man. All of us got to keep talking because we'd all go insane if we stopped talking. So, but hey, man, I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we get you on again. God bless you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, guys. So we're going to wrap up this stream. Thank you for coming. Hopefully this was a helpful discussion. If not, then just come on back. We'll do it again. Because just like I told them, we cannot stop talking. We cannot stop talking. And I would like to, just say, God bless every last one of everybody, even the ones that did not show up. God bless everybody. You know what I mean? Let's get to truth, man. Let's get to what truth is and how we can come to it. There's so much discussion to have. And, my point still stands that God's law is objective. And the only way that we can have a thriving society is if we adhere to God's words and God's law. And, just what was said today, there's so much more to handle, like I said, an eternity of it. But really only God can do the change. So hopefully I'm doing God's work here, and I'm giving people something to think about. And then the Holy Spirit hopefully will open the eyes and the hardened hearts. And so hopefully this helped you, and God bless all of y'all. And we'll come back with another stream another day. So stay tuned, like, subscribe, do all that great stuff. And I'll see y'all in the next one. God bless.